Have you ever questioned your reality? Not just in passing her like when you lose your keys and swear they were right there, but deeply, in that way that makes the ground under your assumptions feel a little less solid. Because if you've ever had that strange fleeting feeling that something isn't quite what it seems, you're not alone. That sensation, that slight distortion, that whisper in the back of your mind that says, this doesn't add up. It's more than just imagination. It's the first sign that your senses might be lying to you. You've spent your whole life relying on them, your eyes, your ears, your skin, your tongue, your nose, as trusted gatekeepers of the world around you. But what if I told you they weren't giving you the truth, not the full truth? What if instead they were giving you the most useful version of reality, not the most accurate one? Think about it. You don't see atoms. You don't hear electromagnetic frequencies. You don't feel the spin of the earth beneath your feet. There are entire spectrums of light and sound that you can't perceive, entire layers of existence happening around you right now that your nervous system filters out completely. Because to your brain, survival matters more than truth. And if the raw truth of reality would overwhelm you, your senses will edit it down, cutting corners, filling gaps, making assumptions, until what you experience is more like a story than a snapshot. You think you see with your eyes, but really, you see with your mind. That's the betrayal, and it's not malicious. It's evolutionary. Your perception is designed to keep you stable, functional and safe, not awakened. And that means you're not experiencing reality itself. You're experiencing your brain's interpretation of it. An interpretation shaped by your biology, your memories, your beliefs, your fears, and even your emotional state in the moment. You know that feeling when time seems to slow down during a car accident, or when you swear you hear someone calling your name but no one's there, or when you stare at a pattern long enough and it begins to move. That's not the world changing. That's your perception breaking character. It's like you've been watching a movie your whole life, and suddenly, for a few seconds, the screen glitches, and you see the projector. Because perception isn't passive, it's active. Your brain takes the raw data from your senses and constructs a model, a simulated version of the world, and that's what you interact with. So when you touch something warm, see something red, hear a distant echo, what you're really experiencing is your brain's rendering of those inputs. And those renderings aren't always honest. Your senses tell you the sun rises and sets, but in truth, it's the earth that spins. Your eyes see a solid table, but that table is 99.999% empty space, vibrating atoms in structured probability fields. You taste sweetness, but the flavor is shaped just as much by smell, texture, and expectation as it is by the sugar itself. You see someone smile and believe they're happy, but it could be a mask, a performance, a reflex. And the most startling part, you don't notice any of this. Not because you're not smart enough, but because your consciousness has been trained to trust what you perceive. But trust doesn't make it true, and certainty is not the same as clarity. Right now, your brain is filling in blind spots. It's predicting the next sound you'll hear in a conversation before the words are spoken. It's blending the colors in your peripheral vision. It's editing out the millions of sensory details it deems irrelevant. Because to show you everything would be too much. So you live inside a curated version of reality, one that feels complete, but is anything but. And when you start to realize that, everything changes. You begin to question the things you were so sure of. You begin to notice just how often your assumptions shape what you believe you're experiencing. You start catching the brain in the act, correcting itself in real time. That flicker of something in the corner of your eye. That moment when a word sounds strange because you said it too many times. That instance when a dream feels more real than your waking life. These are clues, subtle cracks in the illusion. The truth is, you are not experiencing reality. You are experiencing a version of reality, custom-tailored to keep you moving forward in a body that survives, not one that sees. And that version is shaped by countless filters. Biological filters that limit your senses, cognitive filters that color your thoughts, emotional filters that distort your memories, social filters that program your expectations. You've been taught to believe your eyes are windows, but they're more like projectors, and what they project is based on the programming inside. So the question becomes, if you can't trust your senses, then what can you trust? That's where things get powerful, because the more you begin to observe this illusion, not just know about it intellectually, but actually see it as it happens, the more you begin to sense something deeper, something behind the curtain, a stillness that watches the distortion, a part of you that doesn't get tricked by illusions, that doesn't need 5 senses to know the truth. That's the witness, the awareness behind the brain. The real you. Once you start living from that place, where you're not just reacting to sensory input but observing the entire process, you begin to reclaim your power. You begin to see the edits, the projections, the fabrications, and you realize you've been in a magic show your whole life. Only now you can see the sleight of hand. This doesn't mean your senses are useless. They're tools, valuable ones, but you were never meant to be their prisoner. You were meant to be their master. And it starts by waking up to how often they lie. So ask yourself again, have you ever questioned your reality? Because if you're here right now listening to this, then part of you already has. And that part, the part that suspects more, that feels the pull toward truth, that's not satisfied with surface appearances, that part is waking up. And once it does, the illusions begin to fall away. You've been taught to trust them. From the moment you were born, you've relied on 5 faithful companions: your sight, your hearing, your touch, your taste, and your smell. They've shaped your world, guided your choices, and defined what you call real. But what if those 5 senses, the very tools you've trusted to build your version of reality, were never meant to tell you the truth? What if they were designed to deceive you, not maliciously, but strategically? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Your senses lie to you every single day, not once in a while, not just when you're tired or distracted, constantly, and you never notice because they lie so convincingly. Let's start with sight. You believe you see the world clearly, right? Crisp colors, precise edges, an objective reality that sits neatly in front of you. But what you're actually seeing is a stitched-together collage. Your brain is blending light, shape, memory, and expectation into a simulation that feels real, even though it's not. You have blind spots in your vision, actual gaps in what your eyes take in, and your brain fills them automatically, not based on fact, but on educated guesswork. That tree you think you see in perfect clarity, you're actually seeing a small piece of it, then letting your brain fill in the rest. It's not a mirror, it's a rendering, an artistic impression of reality. Now consider hearing. You hear words, music, laughter, the ticking of a clock. But what you don't realize is how often your brain is completing the sound for you. If someone mumbles a sentence and you only hear half, your mind fills in the blanks. Not based on what was actually said, but based on what you expect to hear. That's why misheard lyrics are so common. Your brain isn't just receiving sound, it's interpreting it through filters you don't control. And sound isn't even linear. In certain situations, your brain reorders audio to make sense of it. It smooths over hiccups, it merges echoes. What you think you hear is often a reconstruction, not a reception. Touch feels so real, so personal. It's how you navigate the world, gripping, balancing, sensing temperature. But even this isn't what it seems. You don't feel heat. You feel the difference in temperature. You don't feel pain where it's inflicted. You feel it where your brain decides to place it. That's how phantom limb pain works. You can feel agony in a hand that no longer exists, because your brain's map of your body is more real to you than your body itself. Sometimes even a gentle touch can feel sharp. Sometimes heat feels like cold. Sometimes your brain misinterprets a simple pressure as something more. Your sense of touch isn't reality, it's the nervous system's best guess. Taste is even trickier. You think you're tasting with your tongue, but that's only a fraction of what's happening. Close your nose, and suddenly your favorite meal becomes flavorless. That's because taste is a symphony composed by scent, texture, temperature, and memory. You don't just taste chocolate. You feel its creaminess, smell its richness, and connect it to the emotion of indulgence. Your tongue picks up 5 basic flavors. Everything else, the spice of curry, the tang of citrus, the earthiness of mushrooms, is mostly imagined, an illusion painted over your palate by a mind desperate to add dimension. And then there's smell, the most primitive of your senses, the one tied most directly to memory, emotion, and instinct. A single scent can transport you decades into your past. But even here your sense of smell is wildly untrustworthy. It adapts too quickly. Walk into a room with a strong scent and within minutes you stop noticing it. Not because it's gone, but because your brain decided it's no longer important. You've also been trained to associate certain smells with ideas. Clean doesn't smell like bleach, it smells like the idea of cleanliness. Smell isn't truth, it's suggestion. So why would your senses lie to you so thoroughly? Because they were never designed to reveal truth, they were designed to ensure survival. Evolution didn't craft your perception to help you understand the universe. It crafted it to help you stay alive long enough to reproduce. That's it. That's the game. And in that game, truth is expendable. What matters is usefulness. You didn't evolve to see every wavelength of light. You evolved to see the ones that helped your ancestors avoid predators and find food. You didn't evolve to hear every sound. You evolved to detect the footsteps that mattered. Your sense of taste wasn't designed to be accurate. It was designed to keep you from poisoning yourself. Your sense of smell wasn't meant to identify molecules. It was meant to tell you what's safe, what's familiar, and what's dangerous. Even touch, the sense you think of as so direct, is filtered through delay and distortion, buffered by the brain before it ever becomes real. You are not perceiving reality. You are perceiving a model of reality that has been shaped by generations of genetic refinement to favor survival over accuracy. And the craziest part? You act on this illusion as if it's absolute. You form opinions, make decisions, fall in love, hold grudges, all based on the input of 5 deeply flawed interpreters. You build entire philosophies on the scaffolding of your perception, never realizing the structure is held together by smoke and memory. This is the first awakening, to realize that your 5 senses, as beautiful and intricate as they are, were never meant to show you the full truth. They are filters, not windows. Curators, not reporters. They give you just enough to get by, just enough to keep you moving, just enough to let you feel like you're in control. But now you know. Now the veil has started to lift. And with that knowing comes a new possibility. Not just to question what you see, hear, touch, taste, and smell, but to reach beyond it, to begin exploring what lies behind the senses, behind the mind, behind the illusion itself. Because if the 5 lies you've trusted most were never meant to show you the truth, what else might be hidden just beyond their grasp? You've been told your whole life that seeing is believing, that if your eyes can confirm it, it must be real. But what if I told you that what you see isn't proof of truth, it's proof of persuasion? Because the truth is, your eyes are not cameras, they don't record objective reality. They interpret light, shape, shadow, and movement, and then pass that chaotic information to your brain, which does something even more wild. It makes up a story. That's right. Your vision is not a feed, it's a fabrication. What you're seeing right now, even as you look around the room or the screen in front of you, isn't the world as it is. It's the world as your brain thinks it is. Your brain takes millions of pieces of fragmented visual data and constructs a picture. It guesses what's important, it fills in the blanks, it smooths the edges, it adds context, it removes clutter. It does all of this before you're even aware of it, and that means you don't actually see with your eyes, you see with your expectation. Want proof? Think about optical illusions. Not the kind you find in children's puzzle books, but the real, unsettling kind. the ones that show you how easily your brain is manipulated. Take the famous checker shadow illusion. 2 tiles, one in shadow, one in light. Same color, identical. But your brain refuses to believe it. It forces the shaded one to look lighter. Why? Because it expects shadow to darken object. Your brain is correcting for lighting, even when it doesn't need to. It's overriding what's there in favor of what it assumes should be there. Now, think about the dress. Remember it? White and gold or blue and black. Millions of people saw it differently and argued passionately about it. Same photo, same pixels, but what changed? The brain's interpretation of lighting and shadow. Some brains assumed warm light, some assumed cool light. And from that one invisible assumption, a totally different image emerged. This is your vision on autopilot. But it gets deeper. Your eyes only take in a tiny fragment of your surroundings. As the center of your vision, your fovea is the only part capable of seeing fine detail. The rest is blurry, incomplete. So your brain makes up the rest. It fills your periphery with approximations. It guesses the edges. It blends the background. And unless something shifts dramatically, you don't notice the difference. That's why magic tricks work. That's why sleight of hand is so powerful. Because your brain isn't just observing, it's predicting. And anything that doesn't fit the prediction gets deleted, not later, instantly. You're not just missing parts of reality, your brain is editing them out in real time. Ever walk into a room and completely miss something obvious? A person sitting there, an object in plain sight. It's not because you weren't looking, it's because you weren't expecting it. This is called inattentional blindness. You see only what you've been primed to see, and everything else gets ignored like it doesn't even exist. Now, flip the script. Have you ever thought you saw something that wasn't there? A shadow that looked like a person? A face in the clouds? Movement in the corner of your eye? That's pareidolia, your brain's tendency to impose meaning where there is none. It's a glitch in the system, a survival mechanism. Your brain would rather see a face that isn't there than miss a face that is. Better to be safe than sorry. That's the root of so much visual deception. Your brain leans toward overreaction. It's wired for danger, not clarity. So it fills your visual world with hints, echoes, and symbols, many of which aren't real. And when you believe your eyes, you believe those projections too. But the greatest trick your vision ever pulled is the illusion of continuity. Because even though your eyes dart around constantly, making tiny rapid movements called saccades, you don't perceive the world as jittery. You perceive it as smooth, seamless, continuous. Why? Because your brain erases the blur. It knits together a stable image. It hides the jerks and jumps. And you walk through life believing the world is steady, when really, your brain is stitching together snapshots and calling it a movie. And here's the kicker. There's a part of your retina, the optic disc where the optic nerve connects to your eye. That spot can't see anything. It's a literal blind spot. But you don't walk around with a hole in your vision, because your brain paints over it. It fills in the blank space with what should be there, not what is there, what it thinks belongs. You are seeing hallucinations every single second. Useful hallucinations, consensus hallucinations, but hallucinations nonetheless. So ask yourself, how much of what you've seen in your life was real, and how much was just your brain guessing? That face you thought looked angry, maybe it wasn't. That person you swore you recognized, maybe you didn't. That memory of a place, a room, a moment that you can picture so vividly, maybe it was never that vivid to begin with. Maybe your mind added layers, added warmth, added clarity. Your eyes didn't lie maliciously, but they did lie. Because your eyes aren't interested in truth. They're interested in meaning, in interpretation, in story. They'll show you what you expect, what you fear, what you want. They'll edit out what doesn't fit. They'll highlight what confirms your beliefs, and in doing so, they'll build a reality that feels solid but is built on air. It's humbling to realize this, even disorienting, But it's also liberating, because once you know the game, once you see how the trick works, you stop being fooled by it. You stop arguing with your partner about what color the wall is. You stop insisting you saw something when you didn't. You stop trusting your eyes like they're judges and start treating them like narrators, emotional ones, emotion-biased ones. You begin to look through what you see and ask, what's behind this? What's really here? And slowly you start to glimpse something deeper, not the surface shapes and shadows, but the field beneath them, the awareness that doesn't need eyes to see, the stillness that isn't fooled by motion, the clarity that knows even the most vivid vision is still just a veil. Seeing isn't believing. Believing is choosing to go deeper than what you see. There's a strange phenomenon that doctors can't fully explain, and yet it reveals one of the most profound truths about the mind. It's called the phantom limb. Imagine losing an arm, a leg, a hand, and still feeling it, still sensing its presence, feeling warmth, cold, pressure, even pain. You reach for something with fingers that no longer exist. You itch a palm that was surgically removed. You cry out from the burning sensation in a foot that's been gone for years. How can you feel something that isn't there? The answer doesn't lie in the body. It lies in the mind. Your brain is not just interpreting your body, it's projecting it. You don't just have a body, you have a map of it, a mental blueprint, and that blueprint doesn't vanish just because a piece of the body does. The phantom limb lingers because the brain still believes it's there. You were taught to think your body creates your experience, but what if your experience creates your body? What if the sensation of me is a hologram your brain overlays onto your nervous system, adjustable, vulnerable, and strangely persistent? When a limb is lost, the brain doesn't simply delete it. The neural circuits responsible for that limb sensation still exist. They still fire, they still scream for attention. And without the limb to complete the loop, the mind begins to fill in the gaps with pain, pressure, or movement that isn't real. Or rather, isn't physical, because in your brain it is real. You feel the burn, the spasm, the cramp. You reach to adjust your fingers and you swear you can feel them move, but there's nothing there. Or is there? This illusion isn't rare. Up to 80% of amputees experience it, and it's not just limited to limbs. Phantom sensations can arise from missing eyes, removed breasts, even extracted teeth. The body is more than flesh. It's a field of perception, and that field doesn't vanish. It adapts. Sometimes clumsily, sometimes painfully. But here's what's even more unsettling. The phenomenon of phantom limbs isn't a glitch. It's a clue. A clue that your brain is not just reacting to the body, it's constructing it. Your sense of physicality, of this is me, this is mine, is not fixed. It's fluid. It's constantly being revised, updated, reimagined. So if you can feel a hand that isn't there, what else might you be feeling that doesn't exist? Whatever truths in your body might be ghost stories written by the mind. Think about that pain in your back that doctors can't diagnose. That sensation in your chest when you feel anxious. The racing heart, the tightening jaw, the heaviness in your gut. These are sensations, yes. But they're also interpretations, reactions to emotional input, memories, thoughts, beliefs. You're not just feeling your body, you're feeling your mind through your body. And sometimes your mind makes things up, not because it's broken, but because it's trying to help, trying to understand, trying to protect you. Phantom limbs expose the lie of physical certainty. They show you that what you think of as real sensation might just be a neural echo, a reverberation from a blueprint your brain refuses to erase. And that should make you wonder, where else are you holding on to something that's already gone? Not just limbs, but people, identities, roles, stories. You can cut ties, walk away, let go on paper, but still feel it, still ache, still reach out in the dark expecting it to be there. Because your mind doesn't let go in straight lines. It loops, it repeats, it replays. You can remove someone from your life and still feel their voice, still hear their words, still feel the heat of their presence long after they've gone. A phantom person, a phantom version of yourself from a past life, a past season, a past version of reality that no longer fits, but won't quite dissolve. The same brain that makes you feel a missing leg can make you feel a missing love, a lost identity, a dream you never fulfilled. Your mental body includes more than flesh. It includes memory, attachment, expectation, and none of it lets go without a fight. But what if that wasn't a flaw? What if it was an invitation? Because the phantom isn't just a ghost. It's a mirror. It reflects what the mind believes is still real, even when the world disagrees. And that gives you power. If your brain can believe in what isn't there and make you feel it as if it is, then what else could it create? What if the sensations of peace, clarity, wholeness, and even joy are also possible projections? What if you could create a new version of self, not limited by the scars or voids of the past? The same way phantom pain can be healed through mirror therapy, by tricking the brain into seeing the missing limb and resetting the neural map. What if your internal phantoms could be soothed the same way? What if you could give closure to a version of you that never got to say goodbye? The mind doesn't know the difference between what's imagined and what's seen. It reacts the same way to a vivid dream as it does to waking reality. That's not a weakness. That's an opening, a door into transformation. You're not bound by what's gone. You're not haunted unless you choose to be. The phantom in your mind isn't here to torment you. It's here to remind you of your creative power, the power to construct experience, the power to feel what isn't visible, the power to update the map. You don't have to keep replaying old pain just because the outline still lingers. You can redraw the blueprint. You can teach your brain a new reality, one where peace replaces ache, where presence replaces absence, where sensation isn't a lie, but a bridge. The phantom in your mind is only as real as the meaning you give it. So ask yourself, what am I still feeling that no longer belongs? And more importantly, what could I start feeling if I let myself believe in something better? Close your eyes for a moment and just listen. What do you hear? Maybe it's the hum of electricity in the walls, a car passing by, the faint ticking of a clock. Maybe it's silence. Or maybe you hear something that isn't really there. The truth is, your ears aren't passive receivers of sound. They're interpreters, collaborators, illusionists. And just like your eyes, they lie to you more often than you realize. You think of hearing as something simple. A sound enters your ears and your brain tells you what it is. But that's not what's happening. Your ears send signals, yes, but it's your brain that decides what those signals mean. And that decision isn't always based on fact. It's based on history, on habit, on expectation. You've probably experienced it before. A song comes on the radio. You sing along to the chorus. And then one day someone tells you you've been singing the wrong words. For years, you thought they were saying one thing, but it was something else entirely. The actual lyrics don't even sound similar, and yet, now that you know the real words, you can't unhear them. They suddenly snap into place, like a puzzle piece that was never lost, just misunderstood. That's not just embarrassment. That's a glitch in your auditory matrix. It's called a mondegreen, a misheard lyric. A trick your brain plays when it's trying to make sense of ambiguous sound. It grabs what it expects to hear, not what's actually being said. And it doesn't just happen in music, it happens in conversation too. Think about that time someone said something to you and you swore they said something else. Maybe it was innocent, a miscommunication, but maybe it caused a fight. Maybe it shaped your opinion of them. And all of it was built on a sound that never existed. Because when it comes to hearing, context is everything. Your brain processes sound faster than it processes vision, That means it often guesses, it takes shortcuts, it fills in blanks. If you're in a noisy room and someone says, "Do you want some?" your mind might fill in water, even if they said waffles. It's not a hearing problem, it's a meaning problem. Your brain jumped ahead and got it wrong. That's how powerful your expectations are. They can literally override your senses, and sometimes they go even further. Have you ever heard your name being called when no one's there? Or thought you heard your phone buzz in your pocket, only to realize it didn't? These are auditory hallucinations, and they're far more common than people admit. They don't mean you're broken, they mean your brain is active. Too active sometimes. It's looking for patterns, signals, familiarity, and when it doesn't find them, it creates them. A creaking floorboard becomes a whisper, a fan becomes a voice, the wind becomes someone calling you from another room. Your brain fills the silence with echoes of memory. And here's where it gets even more bizarre. Some people hear entire conversations that never happened. Not schizophrenic delusions, just vivid mental replays, auditory loops, memories so strong they mimic live sound. That's because your auditory cortex, where sound is processed, can be activated by thought alone. You don't need an external noise, just the idea of one, and your brain doesn't always distinguish between the two. There was a famous experiment where people were shown silent videos of people speaking. Some of the viewers reported hearing faint voices, despite there being no sound. Why? Because their brains were so familiar with the visual cue of lips moving, it created the audio to match. That's the McGurk effect in action, where what you see can change what you hear. If a video shows someone mouthing bar, but the sound says da, your brain might hear something completely different. Tha. Not because it's confused, but because it's trying to make the input align. It's choosing coherence over truth. This is why ventriloquism works, why surround sound feels immersive, why you can be fooled by a speaker that seems to throw sound to a different part of the room. It's why people claim to hear ghosts, voices, spirits, not because they're lying, but because their minds are constructing the sounds their expectations feed them. Your ears don't just hear, they negotiate. They ask, what should I be hearing? What makes the most sense? What's the most familiar pattern here? And then your brain answers, even if the answer has no basis in the real world. But this isn't a flaw, it's a feature. Because imagine if your brain insisted on verifying every sound, every syllable, every nuance. You'd never be able to have a normal conversation in a crowded place. You'd never relax. You'd never be able to filter out background noise. Your brain's ability to assume and override is what makes everyday life possible, but it also makes everyday illusions possible. The auditory trickster doesn't just live in obvious hallucinations, it lives in subtle ways. It lives in how you think someone sounds angry even when they're not, in how you hear sarcasm or don't, in how you interpret someone's tone based not on what they said, but on how you feel about them. Sound is vibration, but meaning, that's internal. You hear words through your own filters, through your fears, your history, your assumptions. You hear people's intentions based on what you expect from them, not what they're actually saying. And if you're honest with yourself, you've probably had entire arguments based on sounds that were shaped more by your mind than their mouth. So, what do you do with this? You stop assuming your ears are truth-tellers. You start realizing they're more like interpreters, translators, sometimes even unreliable narrators. And once you recognize that, you can begin to listen differently. You listen with curiosity instead of certainty. You ask yourself, is that what they really said or what I think I heard? You slow down. You ask for clarity. You notice your own internal commentary as it plays in the background. Because the moment you stop taking your hearing for granted is the moment you start really hearing. Not just sound, but silence, intention, vibration, resonance. You start hearing with your presence, not just your ears. And that's where truth begins. not in the volume of the voice, but in the quiet between words. You think you know what your favorite food tastes like. You savor that first bite of chocolate cake, the tang of a lemon, the comforting warmth of a spoonful of soup. It feels unmistakably real, grounded in your tongue, in your mouth, in the experience of taste itself. But what if that wasn't the whole truth? What if I told you that most of what you think is taste isn't coming from your tongue at all? That flavor isn't a direct experience, but a carefully crafted illusion, one orchestrated by your senses, your memory, your beliefs, and your expectations. Because the reality is, taste is not a solo act, it's a multisensory performance, and your brain is the director, deciding which actors get the spotlight, which memories get triggered, which emotions are wrapped around every bite. Let's start with smell. When you bite into an apple or sip your favorite coffee, your nose is doing far more work than you realize. As you chew, volatile compounds travel up the back of your throat and into your nasal cavity, a process called retronasal olfaction. It's not the same as sniffing something directly. It's more subtle, more internal, and yet it's responsible for about 80% of what you think is taste. That's why when your nose is congested, everything tastes bland. Your tongue still registers the basics: sweet, salty, sour, bitter, umami, but the richness, the complexity, the nuance, gone. Without smell, your favorite dish becomes flat and forgettable. But even smell isn't objective, it's tied to memory, to emotion, to moments in your past that you didn't even realize were shaping your present. Have you ever smelled something and suddenly found yourself transported to childhood? Maybe the scent of fresh bread brings you back to your grandmother's kitchen, or the aroma of sunscreen and salt water pulls you into the memory of a long-forgotten summer. That isn't just nostalgia, that's your brain anchoring flavor to feeling. When you eat something and say, "This reminds me of home," you're not just describing a taste. You're describing an entire emotional ecosystem that's been triggered in an instant. And then there's sight. The way food looks completely changes the way it tastes. Studies have shown that when people are served wine dyed with food coloring, they'll describe it with flavor notes that match the false color. A white wine tinted red will be described as bold, berry-like, full-bodied, even though it's the exact same wine. Why? Because your brain doesn't just process taste, it predicts it. Before you take a bite, your mind has already formed expectations. If something looks sweet, your brain prepares for sweetness. If it looks burnt, it anticipates bitterness. And those expectations influence your actual perception of the flavor. It's not just about what's in your mouth, it's about what's in your mind. Even the shape of a plate, the color of the bowl, the weight of the fork, all of these can alter how a food tastes to you. In one experiment, participants rated the same yogurt as tasting better when it was served in a heavier container. Not because the yogurt changed, but because the brain interpreted weight as quality. That's how deep the illusion goes. You think you're tasting something real and consistent, but in reality every flavor you experience is being filtered through layers of mental bias. And once that happens, the line between truth and projection disappears. You could eat the exact same dish in two different restaurants, one beautifully lit with elegant music, the other loud and sterile, and swear they tasted different. Not because your tongue changed, but because everything else did. Taste is not an isolated sensation, it's a story, and you're the one writing it. That's why some of the most memorable meals you've ever had weren't necessarily the most gourmet. Maybe it was a simple snack eaten after a long hike. Maybe it was cheap street food during a moment of joy. Maybe it was something bland that felt divine simply because of who you were with. Your brain isn't just recording flavor. It's associating it. So when you say something tastes better than something else, you're not just making a culinary judgment. You're revealing how deeply you're influenced by your surroundings, your mood, your history, and your perceptions. And here's where things get even stranger. Your expectations can override your actual taste receptors. In blind taste tests, people have rated expensive wine as better than cheap wine. until they're told which is which. Once they believe that cheaper wine is expensive, they start describing it with richer, more complex language. Their brain literally changes the experience to match the price tag. That's the power of suggestion. And it doesn't stop at wine. A burger served on a fancy plate tastes better than the same burger in a wrapper. A piece of chocolate described as artisan is rated more flavorful than one labeled generic. Not because of what's happening on your tongue, but because of what's happening in your belief system. Your mind is flavoring the flavor, which means real taste, the pure, unfiltered sensation of a food, is almost impossible to experience. Because you're always bringing something to the table. A memory, a preference, a label, a cultural bias, an emotional state. And those hidden ingredients are stronger than salt or sugar. Taste, as you know it, is a dream you agree to believe, a projection stitched together by multiple senses, wrapped in memory and flavored by emotion. And when you realize that, you start to question what else in your life is being filtered this way. What else feels real only because your mind has convinced you it is? What other sensations are not direct truths, but carefully curated illusions meant to create a sense of stability, pleasure, or comfort? Your taste buds were never meant to give you reality. They were meant to guide you toward nourishment, away from poison, toward the familiar, away from the unknown. But what was once a survival tool has now become a playground for manipulation. From advertising to packaging, from social cues to personal expectations, you are constantly being told what something should taste like before you even experience it. And your mind obliges, it adapts, it bends the truth to fit the frame. So the next time you take a bite of something and say, that's delicious, pause for a second. Ask yourself, is it the food I'm tasting or the story I've attached to it? Because if you can taste something that isn't really there, then what else might you be sensing right now that never truly existed? There's a moment that happens without warning. You catch a scent, something subtle, something familiar, and suddenly you're no longer here. You're not in the room you were just sitting in. You're not thinking about today. You've been pulled backward in time, into a memory so vivid it almost feels like a dream. But you're not seeing it clearly. You're feeling it. The atmosphere, the emotion, the energy of a moment long gone, all from one invisible whisper of scent. That's the power of smell. It doesn't just remind you of the past, it recreates it, emotionally, physiologically, energetically. Unlike sight or sound, scent bypasses the normal filters of memory. It doesn't arrive in your brain through logic or structure. It shoots straight into the limbic system, the ancient core of your mind, where emotion and memory live side by side. That's why smells can make you cry, why a hint of perfume or the scent of pine needles or the crisp air before it rains can fill your chest with a strange ache you can't explain. Because your brain doesn't process smell like it processes other senses. It doesn't analyze, it doesn't compare, it just feels. You might smell fresh-cut grass and suddenly feel like you're 8 years old again, sitting in the sun with no responsibilities. You might smell your father's cologne in a crowd and turn around with a rush of hope, only to remember he's been gone for years. It's not rational, it's not cognitive, it's primal. And it doesn't come with a full scene. That's the strange part. You rarely get a detailed playback. Instead, you get fragments, sensations, emotion without narrative. You remember how it felt to be there, the nervous excitement, the comfort, the fear, the love. You feel it in your body, not your mind, because smell is the only sense directly wired to the emotional brain. The olfactory bulb, which processes smell, is physically connected to the amygdala and hippocampus, the regions of the brain responsible for emotion and memory. That connection is ancient, evolutionary. Long before we developed language, we relied on scent to detect danger, to find food, to recognize kin. And because of that, our emotional world became entangled with aroma. Smell isn't just sensory, it's symbolic, it holds meaning deeper than thought. That's why you can walk past a bakery and suddenly miss someone you haven't thought about in years. Why the scent of a leather jacket can make you feel inexplicably safe or deeply sad. Why hospitals have a certain sterile smell that makes your stomach twist, even if you've never had a bad experience there. It's not about the smell itself, it's about what your nervous system associates with it. Smells don't bring back facts, they bring back feelings. You can't smell vanilla and remember the date of your birthday party, but you might remember how the cake made you feel, the warmth, the joy, or the loneliness you didn't express. Smell doesn't care about chronology. It brings back the energy, the presence, the soul print of the moment. And that's what makes it so haunting. Because sometimes those feelings come back stronger than the memory itself. You walk into a space and your body tenses, your heart races, your breath shallows, and you don't know why, until you realize the scent in the air matches one from a place where you once felt afraid. The body remembers what the mind forgets. Scent doesn't ask permission. It doesn't wait until you're ready. It activates the archive whether you want it to or not. But here's the beautiful part. It can heal you too. A smell can pull you back into a version of yourself that you've forgotten. It can remind you of innocence, of love, of safety, of who you were before the world told you who to be. Aromas have the power to restore not just memory, but identity. The you who felt free, the you who laughed without guilt, the you who trusted life. That's why certain essential oils calm you instantly. It's not just the chemistry, it's the unconscious association. Lavender, reminding you of calm evenings. Citrus, waking you up with brightness. Frankincense, grounding you in ancient stillness. Your body recognizes the signal before your mind does. And that's also why companies use scent in marketing. Malls pump in smells to make you feel a certain way. Hotels design custom fragrances to anchor your experience to a brand. The smell of popcorn in a movie theater, the scent of sunscreen at a beach resort, these aren't accidents. They're psychological anchors, emotional fingerprints. Smell has the power to manipulate, but it also has the power to awaken. Because if you can become aware of the memories your body is holding through scent, you can begin to listen, not just to the past, but to what still lives inside you. The unprocessed emotions, the stories you've outgrown, the parts of you that are still waiting to be seen. A scent can reveal the ache of what's unresolved. And when that ache rises, you have a choice. You can suppress it, or you can witness it. You can let the memory wash through you, not to relive the pain, but to reclaim the feeling, to bring compassion to the part of you that still feels stuck in that invisible moment. This is the sacred gift of scent. It doesn't just remind you of where you've been. It invites you to return to the emotion, to meet it again, with new eyes, new heart, new wisdom. Because every time a smell brings back a wave of emotion, it's showing you where your energy still lives, where your healing still hides. And when you breathe into it, not to judge but to understand, you're no longer trapped by the memory. You're dancing with it. You're letting it teach you, move you, soften you. So the next time a scent catches you off guard, don't dismiss it. Don't rush past it. Pause. Feel what's there. Ask yourself, who was I in that moment? What was I longing for? What did I believe back then that I no longer need to carry? Let the scent speak. Let it tell the truth your mind forgot. Because in that truth is a part of you ready to come home. Time isn't what you think it is. You were taught to see it as fixed, linear, dependable. 1 second after another, 60 minutes in an hour, 24 hours in a day, always moving forward, always ticking along. But if you've ever sat through 5 minutes of deep silence, or spent 5 minutes waiting for something painful to happen, then you know the truth. 5 minutes doesn't always feel like 5 minutes, and that's your first clue. Time doesn't live in the clock, it lives in the mind. You've felt it before, when you were a child and summers felt eternal. Days stretched out like highways with no end. An hour could feel like a lifetime. But now, as an adult, entire weeks blur together. Years pass in what feels like a breath. You look back and wonder, where did the time go? Time didn't speed up. Your perception of it changed. Because your brain isn't measuring time objectively. It's not counting seconds, it's interpreting experience. The more stimulus, the more memory, the more novelty in a moment, the longer that moment feels in retrospect. That's why childhood feels expansive. Everything was new, every day was filled with firsts. Your brain recorded more detail. But now, so much of life is routine, predictable, repetitive. And your brain stops recording what it already knows. So the moment passes, and it doesn't get stored. It vanishes. And that's how time starts to collapse. You think you've lived a full day, but at the end of it you barely remember anything. Not because nothing happened, but because nothing different happened. Nothing memorable, nothing worthy of being marked in your internal timeline. And that's why moments with high emotional charge, joy, fear, grief, wonder, feel slow. They expand. They become dense. Your awareness stretches out to capture every frame. That's why accidents feel like they happen in slow motion. Why falling in love feels like time stops. Your brain floods with presence. It stops assuming, it starts paying attention. But when you drift through a day on autopilot, time slips away unnoticed. It's not time you're losing, it's attention. And attention is the real heartbeat of time. The more fully you experience a moment, the more time you feel you've lived. That's why a single minute of awe, a breathtaking view, a moment of stillness in nature can feel like eternity, while an hour scrolling on your phone vanishes without a trace. Your perception of time isn't passive, it's participatory. You shape it with your presence. But there's another layer. Your emotional state bends time even more. When you're anxious, time drags. When you're bored, it stalls. When you're in flow, completely immersed in what you're doing, it flies. And when you're grieving, time feels suspended. You can be surrounded by people, conversation, laughter, and still feel like you're floating in another dimension where minutes don't matter. Because time, as you live it, is not universal, it's deeply personal. Two people can sit side by side through the same hour and experience it entirely differently. One feels it race, the other feels it crawl. One is present, the other is trapped in thought. Same 60 minutes, different realities, and yet you still try to live by the clock. You measure your worth in productivity per hour. You tie your value to how much you get done before sunset. You tell yourself you're running out of time, but what if you never had time to begin with? What if time was just your mind's way of organizing experience? Because outside of your perception, time isn't ticking. It's not a stream you're floating down. It's a dimension. One that bends, folds, and expands based on how you move through it. That's why trauma distorts it so violently. A single traumatic event can dominate your entire internal timeline. 10 seconds of terror can cast a shadow over decades of peace. Not because time broke, but because your mind carved it into significance. That moment becomes louder than all the others. It gets etched deeper into your neural pathways, and from then on everything else gets measured against it. But healing does something beautiful. It softens that moment. It returns control of your inner clock. And when you reclaim that sense of presence, time begins to open up again. You start noticing things. The way the light moves through the trees, the space between heartbeats, the warmth in a quiet smile. These aren't new things. You've just been moving too fast to feel them. You've been racing through days, trying to beat a clock that only exists in your head. But the truth is, time isn't chasing you, it's waiting for you. Waiting for you to slow down, to show up, to breathe. Because when you do, when you return to the present moment, time begins to stretch. A single breath becomes wide enough to hold a universe. A walk to the kitchen becomes a journey. A conversation becomes sacred. And that's the hidden sense you never learn to trust, your internal clock. It's not synchronized to the ticking of seconds, it's synchronized to your soul. When you're aligned, when your thoughts, emotions, and body are in harmony, your experience of time changes. It becomes fluid, generous, expansive, and you realize you've been measuring your life not in hours, but in how awake you've been. Because a year spent asleep at the wheel doesn't touch a week of deep, embodied presence. And that's the invitation. To stop living by default, to stop chasing time like a thief, to remember that time isn't slipping away from you, you've just been slipping away from time. So pause, right now. Feel this moment. Really feel it. The texture of the air, the rhythm of your breath, the space between words. This is where your life is happening, not in the next deadline, not in the memories behind you, not in some imagined future where everything finally makes sense. It's happening here. And when you fully arrive, time stops being the enemy. It becomes the canvas, and you become the artist. What if I told you that most of your experience, what you see, what you feel, what you believe to be happening around you, isn't a recording of reality, but a mental construction? That your brain, as incredible as it is, doesn't just receive information, it creates it. You were taught to think of perception as a passive process, something that happens to you. Light enters your eyes, sound hits your ears, and the world is revealed. But that's not how it works. You don't experience reality directly. You experience a version of reality that your brain assembles on the fly. Your brain isn't a mirror, it's a projector. Every moment you're alive, your senses collect fragments of data, not the full picture, just the edges, the hints, the shadows, and then your brain fills in the rest. It constructs the illusion of solidity. It creates depth, shape, motion, even time, not because it's trying to deceive you, but because it's trying to be efficient. And to do that, it leans heavily on expectation. What you expect to see, you're more likely to see. What you expect to hear, you're more likely to hear. Not because those things are true, but because your brain prefers familiarity over accuracy. It would rather give you a story that makes sense than admit it doesn't know what's happening. That's why optical illusions work. That's why you can hear someone say one thing and swear they said another. That's why déjà vu feels so real. Your brain is pulling from previous patterns, trying to fit the present into a past frame. It's not glitching, it's guessing. You are not seeing reality, you're seeing your brain's best guess at reality, and that guess is filtered through your beliefs, your memories, your emotions, and even your mood. Take color, for example. There is no such thing as red in the physical world. Red is just a wavelength of light. Your brain interprets that wavelength as a color, and it doesn't even do it consistently. In different lighting, red becomes orange. In shadow, it dulls. And yet, you perceive consistency. You see the apple as red whether you're inside or outside. Your brain is adjusting the input to match your expectations. Now think about sound. Your ears detect vibrations in the air, but it's your brain that decides what those vibrations mean. A familiar melody, a baby's cry, a whispered name. These aren't inherent in the sound. They're interpretations layered on top of raw sensation. And sometimes your brain gets lazy. It doesn't hear every syllable, so it fills in the rest. It doesn't see every detail, so it invents them. You're not watching the world. You're imagining it, faster than you can notice. But here's the deeper truth. Your experience of self, who you are, what you like, what you fear, is also constructed. It's a mental model, an identity stitched together from stories you've repeated to yourself, shaped by your past, reinforced by feedback from others. And that model, it's editable. Just like your brain updates its perception of the world based on new data, it updates your sense of self too. Slowly, quietly, often without your awareness. That's why change feels so confusing. When you start to grow, evolve, or heal, your internal model resists. It tries to snap you back to what's familiar, even if it's painful, because familiar feels safe, predictable, expected. But what if you stopped expecting what's always been? What if you realized that much of what you perceive about the world, about yourself, about what's possible, isn't truth, it's habit? Then you'd start to see the cracks, the spaces where new perception could enter, where you could tell a different story. Because here's the miracle. If your brain can make it up, then it can make it new. You can choose different expectations, different filters. You can train your mind to look for beauty instead of danger, to hear compassion instead of criticism, to sense opportunity where it once sensed threat, not by ignoring reality, but by participating in its creation. Your attention isn't neutral, it's creative. What you focus on becomes more vivid, more real, more influential. If you believe people are unkind, you'll start noticing rudeness everywhere. If you believe you're unworthy, your mind will highlight every moment that seems to prove it, not because those moments are more true, but because they match your model. But change the model, and you change what gets through. That's not delusion, that's perception. You've been doing it your whole life. Every time you remembered something differently than someone else, every time you fell in love with someone others didn't understand, every time a song or a place or a voice moved you while leaving others unmoved, you weren't reacting to the world. You were reacting to the version your brain created. And if your brain is constructing reality, then you are more powerful than you've ever been told. You can't control every input. You can't avoid pain. But you can shift the framework through which your mind builds the world. You can rewrite the template. You can invite wonder, even when fear tries to dominate. You can practice gratitude, not because everything is perfect, but because gratitude trains your brain to look for what's nourishing. You are not at the mercy of your senses. You are their sculptor. You don't have to keep living the same story, seeing the same distortions, feeling the same limitations. You can challenge your brain's guesses. You can bring consciousness into the places that used to be automatic. And when you do, you start to glimpse something beyond the illusion, a deeper awareness, a steadiness that doesn't shift with perception, a center that remains when all appearances fall away. Because even though your experience is constructed, there's something within you that knows, something that watches the illusion, that feels when it's off, that senses when a deeper truth is being missed. That part of you is real, the observer behind the constructed world, and it's always waiting for you to return. Close your eyes for a moment and picture your childhood bedroom. You might see the walls, the bedspread, the window, the tiny objects on the shelves. You might even remember the way the light came through the curtains in the late afternoon, or the sound of footsteps down the hallway. But here's the question. How much of what you just saw is real? And how much was filled in by your mind? Because your mind's eye, the place where memory meets imagination, is a master illusionist. And sometimes it lies with such precision that you never question it. You believe what you recall. You trust what you picture. But what if I told you that every time you remember something, you're not replaying it, you're recreating it? That's the unsettling truth. Memory isn't a file you pull from a cabinet. It's a story you reassemble. Each time you access a memory, you alter it slightly. You color it with who you are today. You edit out what no longer fits. You add new meaning to old events. And then, here's the kicker, you resave it, slightly changed, slightly distorted, slightly more a product of imagination than experience. And this is where the illusion deepens. The more often you recall a memory, the more vivid it becomes, not necessarily because it's accurate, but because it's been rehearsed. Your brain rewards repetition, familiarity, and when something is repeated, true or not, it starts to feel true. That's why false memories are so dangerous. They don't feel false. They feel intimate. You've probably experienced this before. A conversation you remember vividly, only to have someone else swear it never happened. A moment you were sure you witnessed, until you realize you couldn't have possibly been there. A childhood memory that turns out to be a story someone told you, not something you lived. Your mind filled in the blanks, not maliciously, but instinctively. It wanted the story to make sense, it wanted to resolve the missing pieces, and so it did. But now, that imagined image lives inside you as if it were truth. This is the power and peril of mental imagery. Your brain doesn't draw a sharp line between what's imagined and what's remembered. Both use the same neural circuits. Both activate the same visual areas. That's why when you daydream or visualize, the images feel so real. Your brain lights up as if it's seeing something with your eyes, even when your eyes are closed. You've seen something in your mind so many times it starts to shape your identity. A failure you relive over and over, a humiliation you replay in full color, a fantasy of success that motivates or haunts you. These images aren't passive. They influence your emotions, your choices, your sense of self, and that means your inner world, your so-called reality, is often shaped more by imagination than observation. But here's the twist. Your mind's eye isn't just a liar. It's also a creator. The same mechanism that forms false memories can also be used to construct new possibilities, visualizations of healing, mentally rehearsed bravery, imaginings of peace. Your nervous system doesn't always know the difference. That's why athletes mentally train before performance, why meditators visualize light filling the body, why affirmations, when paired with imagery, rewire the brain. Because your inner eye has power, not to report the truth, but to shape it. The danger comes when you forget that power, when you assume your mental imagery is fact, when you cling to a version of the past that never happened, or fear a version of the future that never will. You suffer not because of what's real, but because of what you imagine might be. And imagination doesn't need evidence to feel convincing, it just needs repetition, emotional charge, a believable narrative. That's how fear takes root. That's how anxiety grows, not from actual danger, but from mental pictures that hijack your attention. You picture the car crash, the rejection, the humiliation, and your body responds as if it's happening now. Your heart races, your breath shortens, your shoulders tense. Not because you're in danger, but because your imagination convinced your body it was. This is the shadow side of the mind's eye, but it's also where transformation begins. Because if your mental images can create stress and falsehood, they can also create healing and truth. What would happen if you used your imagination consciously? What if you questioned the images that brought you pain and replaced them with images that brought you peace? Not to escape reality, but to redefine your relationship with it. You are not at the mercy of your memories, you are their author. You can revisit a painful memory, not to relive it, but to reframe it, to witness it from your present awareness, to see the child you were with compassion, to feel the courage it took to survive, to honor your story not as a fixed trauma, but as a chapter that shaped you. Because even if the original event can't be changed, your experience of it can. And that's what matters most. You're not bound to the false snapshots your brain made in haste. You can update them, transform them. You can create new images, clearer ones, kinder ones. And as those images take root, your nervous system responds. It softens, it opens, it heals. So the next time your mind pulls up a vivid scene, ask yourself, is this truth or interpretation? Is this memory or imagination? And then ask something deeper. Is this image serving me or trapping me? Because your mind's eye will keep showing you pictures, that's what it does. But you can choose which ones to believe, which ones to follow, which ones to build your future upon. Your imagination isn't the enemy, it's the doorway, not just to deception, but to liberation. Every day your senses are bombarded. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, textures. Your brain, takes in this flood of data, organizes it, filters it, and hands you a version of reality you can work with. You call that perception. You say, I see this, I hear that, I feel this way. But beneath all of that noise, there's something else happening. There's something deeper. There's a presence that isn't reacting, it's observing. There's an awareness that isn't caught in the content of experience, but is quietly holding it all. That awareness is you. Not the you who flinches when something startles you, not the you who reacts in anger or melts in joy or gets caught in thought loops, but the deeper you. The witness, the one behind the perception, the one who notices the noticing. You've mistaken perception for self. You've identified with the sights your eyes deliver, the sounds your ears report, the thoughts your mind repeats. But those are all temporary. They shift, they change, they vanish, and yet something remains. Think about it. When you were 5 years old, the world looked different. You were smaller, you knew less, you felt more freely. But even then, there was a you aware of what was happening. That awareness is the same now. It hasn't aged, it hasn't evolved, it has simply witnessed your evolution. And that's the key. Perception is what moves. Awareness is what watches. Perception can be distorted, it can lie, it can malfunction. But awareness, it doesn't do anything but be. It doesn't try to fix. It doesn't judge. It simply notices. Silently, constantly, faithfully. You feel pain, but awareness itself is not in pain. You feel joy, but awareness doesn't get carried away. It stays steady no matter what plays on the screen of your senses. It's like the sky watching clouds pass. The clouds may be dark or bright, fast or slow, but the sky never gets entangled. The sky never resists. It simply holds. That's your awareness. And most of the time you forget it's there, because you're caught in perception. You see a face and you assign meaning. You hear a tone and decide someone's angry. You feel a flutter in your chest and assume something's wrong. Your mind spins stories, it connects the dots, it makes judgments. That's what perception does. It tries to interpret. But awareness doesn't interpret, it just sees. And the moment you recognize that distinction, everything begins to shift. You realize you don't have to believe every thought. You don't have to react to every sensation. You can watch it all happen and remain rooted in something deeper, something untouched. Perception is reactive. It says, this is good, this is bad, I like this, I hate that. Awareness is spacious. It says nothing, it just allows. And in that allowing, you find peace. Because you're no longer trapped in the storm. You're the space in which the storm happens. You've been taught to believe you are your mind, that your thoughts define you, that your emotions are your truth. But the moment you pause and observe those thoughts, those emotions, those reactions, you've already proven you're something more. You are the one who sees the thought, which means you are not the thought. You are the one who feels the fear, which means you are not the fear. You are the one who notices the reaction, which means you are not the reaction. So, who are you? You are awareness itself, the silent witness of every moment. And that awareness doesn't need to be created. It doesn't need to be fixed. It just needs to be recognized. Because you've never lost it. You've just been distracted. You've been looking through the lens of perception for so long that you forgot the lens is optional. You forgot you can set it down. You forgot that you can stop trying to interpret reality and simply be with it. Awareness doesn't require understanding. It requires presence. And when you rest in presence, even for a moment, perception softens. The mind quiets. The story fades. And what remains is you, not as a character in a drama, but as the open, luminous field in which the drama unfolds. You can look at a tree and simply see it, without naming it, judging it, comparing it. You can hear a sound and simply listen, without needing to interpret or analyze. You can feel an emotion rise and fall, like a wave, without needing to fix or chase it. That's not detachment. That's intimacy. Real intimacy. Because for the first time, you're meeting reality as it is, not through the fog of expectation or belief. And the more you rest in that awareness, the more you realize how much of your suffering came from misidentification. You weren't hurt by what happened. You were hurt by the story you told yourself about what happened. You weren't stressed by the event. You were stressed by your mind trying to control the outcome. You weren't lost. You were just disconnected from the quiet, steady presence that's been with you all along. Perception will always be part of your human experience. You can't shut it off. But you can learn to see it for what it is. A filter, a tool, a function of the mind, not the core of who you are. And when you live from that deeper awareness, perception becomes lighter, less personal, less charged. You can watch your thoughts without drowning in them. You can feel your emotions without being consumed. You can move through the world with more grace, because you're no longer reacting to every ripple. You're rooted in the ocean beneath it all. That's your birthright. To live from awareness, not just perception. To stop confusing the noise for the truth. To wake up, not to a different world, but to the same world, seen clearly, held gently, experienced fully. Because behind every flicker of perception, you are there, watching, knowing, being. And that has always been enough. You like to think your thoughts are your own, that your emotions rise from some authentic place within you, that your reactions are based on your experiences, your values, your perspective. But what if I told you, your brain is constantly running simulations of other people? And more than that, what if I told you that much of what you think, feel, and even desire might not originate from you at all? There is a hidden mechanism in your brain, a secret system that operates in silence, mirror neurons. These are the cells that activate not only when you take an action, but also when you watch someone else take that same action. When you see someone smile, your brain fires as if you smiled. When you watch someone cry, the emotional circuits inside you light up, mirroring their grief. You don't just see emotions, you feel them, as if they were yours. And that creates a profound illusion, because the line between you and the other begins to blur. Their energy seeps into your nervous system, their facial expressions, their tone, their posture. It all becomes part of your internal data. Without conscious awareness, you begin to absorb, to copy, to internalize. You think you're responding independently, but often you're echoing. That's why moods are contagious, why laughter spreads, why you yawn when someone else does. It's not just social mimicry, it's neurological empathy, a mirroring of mind. And that mirroring doesn't stop with emotion, it extends to behavior, to preference, to belief. Have you ever walked into a room full of anxiety and suddenly felt tense for no clear reason? Have you ever left a conversation and felt heavy even though nothing painful was said? That's mirror neurons at work, reading the subtle cues, picking up on the unspoken, and before you realize it, your inner world has shifted. Not because you changed, but because you mirrored someone else. And this is where the illusion becomes dangerous. Because if you don't recognize that you're mirroring, you assume those thoughts and feelings are your own. You start shaping your behavior to match the people around you. You align, you blend, you adapt, until you forget who you were before their presence. This happens in relationships, in families, in groups, in culture. You take on patterns that were modeled for you. You repeat phrases you heard growing up. You carry fears that were never yours to begin with, and you believe it all to be part of your personality. But what if some of those reactions are nothing more than inherited echoes? What if your anger isn't yours, but a reflection of the rage you witnessed? What if your silence isn't peace, but the mirroring of someone else's emotional suppression? What if your dreams aren't your own, but the ones handed to you, reinforced by approval? It's not that you're weak or unoriginal, It's that your brain is wired to belong. It's always scanning for connection, for inclusion, for safety. And mirroring is how it does that. How it creates rapport. How it says, I'm like you. I understand. Don't reject me. And in many ways it works beautifully. It creates empathy, harmony, intuition. But it also makes you vulnerable to losing yourself. Because in the mirror, there is no center. Just reflections of reflections, layers of interpretation, imitation mistaken for identity. So the question becomes, how do you know which thoughts are truly yours? You begin by noticing. The next time you feel something strongly, pause. Ask yourself, where did this come from? Was this emotion already present, or did it arrive when someone else walked in? Is this belief something I've tested, or just something I absorbed because it was all I ever heard? Awareness breaks the spell. You don't need to stop mirroring entirely. That would be impossible and inhuman. But you can learn to observe when you're doing it and create a buffer between perception and ownership. You can feel someone's sadness without carrying it. You can respect someone's opinion without adopting it. You can be present with someone's energy without letting it overwrite your own. Because your brain might simulate someone else, but you get to choose whether to integrate it. This is the beginning of spiritual sovereignty. It's the shift from unconscious absorption to conscious discernment, from being a mirror to becoming a witness. And as you practice that discernment, you start to see just how much of your life has been shaped by invisible simulations. The way you walk, the way you talk, the way you think about love, success, worthiness, God. Much of it came from outside you, modeled, mirrored, memorized. But now, you get to ask the question that rewrites the script. Do I still choose this? Not, did this work for them? Not, does this keep me accepted? But, is this true for me right now? When you ask that question sincerely, old mirrors begin to crack. You start noticing how your nervous system reacts in front of certain people. You see how you tighten, shrink, or perform. You realize how many of your choices were designed to avoid disapproval, to win praise, to maintain roles that no longer fit. And in that noticing, you reclaim yourself. You begin to unmirror, not with judgment, not with blame, but with love. Because even the false selves you've worn were created for a reason, to keep you safe, to help you belong, to earn connection in a world that often demands performance over presence. But now, you're ready to meet the one behind the mirror, the one who watches the mind simulate, the one who knows the difference between resonance and replication, the one who can witness another person's experience fully, without losing their own center. That's your essence, your true self. It doesn't need to mimic. It doesn't need to prove. It simply is. And from that still point you can move through the world with compassion, without confusion, with empathy, without entanglement, with presence, without performance. You can love others without becoming them. You can feel deeply without forgetting who you are. Because now you know, not every thought is yours. Not every emotion belongs to you. Not every dream is meant to be chased. You get to choose which reflections you keep and which ones you let fade. And in that choosing, you step out of the mirror and into your truth. You wake up in the morning and assume you're one unified being, one identity, one consciousness, one stream of thoughts unfolding smoothly through the day. But what if that's just another illusion? What if, deep within your brain, there are actually two separate realities running side by side, each interpreting the world in a fundamentally different way? Because the truth is, your brain is divided. Two hemispheres, left and right, not just anatomically but perceptually. Two styles of seeing, two modes of interpreting, two entire versions of reality, happening at once. And what's wild is, they don't always agree. The left hemisphere is the organizer, the analyst, the interpreter. It loves language, logic, linearity. It breaks things down into categories, sequences, parts. It wants to understand how things work. It's brilliant at details, at naming, at predicting based on patterns. But it also makes assumptions. It fills in gaps with guesses. It creates stories to maintain a sense of control. It's the part of you that needs to explain everything, even if the explanation isn't accurate. Then, there's the right hemisphere, the dreamer, the feeler, the perceiver of the whole. It sees the forest, not just the trees. It processes things spatially, emotionally, intuitively. It doesn't care about categories. It cares about connection. It doesn't ask, what is this thing? It asks, what does this mean? While the left wants to dissect, the right wants to experience. But here's where the illusion gets even deeper. You don't experience the division, you experience the synthesis. You move through the world as if your mind is a single stream, when in fact, it's a negotiated truce between two fundamentally different worldviews, and sometimes that truce breaks. In rare cases, due to injury or in split-brain patients, scientists have observed what happens when the two hemispheres can't communicate. One hand buttons a shirt while the other unbuttons it. One hemisphere sees an image and reacts emotionally, while the other, unaware of the image, invents a logical story to explain the reaction. It's not a malfunction. It's a glimpse into what's always happening beneath the surface, because even in the so-called healthy, integrated mind, there are moments where the split reveals itself, when you feel one thing and think another, when your intuition pulls one way but your logic insists on another path, when you know something in your bones but can't explain why. It's the division. That's the left and right hemispheres speaking two different languages, trying to translate one another. But here's the problem. Modern life favors the left. Society rewards what can be measured, defined, categorized. It elevates the rational mind, the linear plan, the structured goal. It praises clarity and dismisses ambiguity. It treats emotion as weakness, intuition as unreliability. So the voice of the right hemisphere gets quieter. It becomes the background the subtle nudge, the half-formed thought that disappears under the pressure to be reasonable. But just because it's quiet doesn't mean it's wrong, because the right hemisphere sees what the left cannot. It notices context, it senses emotion, it detects meaning before explanation, it can read a room before a word is spoken, it feels the energetic undercurrents your thinking mind would never recognize. And when you ignore it, you lose half of yourself. You become disjointed, over-rationalized. You start solving problems that don't need to be solved, just felt. You miss the poetry in the moment. You miss the symbolic meaning behind your experience. You become efficient, but not alive. Because logic can take you far, but it can't bring you home. Only integration can do that. When the left and right hemispheres learn to honor each other, not dominate, not suppress, but collaborate, something miraculous happens. You start living in wholeness. You use your logic to structure your intuition. You let your emotions inform your decisions without letting them control you. You think in paragraphs, but feel in poetry. And this balance isn't theoretical. It's deeply practical. It changes how you solve problems, how you love, how you create, how you connect. It turns a flat world into a three-dimensional experience. But to live that way, you have to notice the split. You have to catch yourself when you're stuck in the left brain, analyzing, predicting, controlling. You have to create space for the right to speak, to feel, to flow, to be. And sometimes the right speaks through silence, through art, through tears, through dreams, through the sense that something is off even when everything looks perfect. It doesn't use words, it uses wisdom. But only if you're listening. And once you start listening, you begin to notice how often your left brain tries to overwrite your truth. You say yes when your gut says no. You push forward when your heart begs you to slow down. You stay in places your soul has already outgrown because the story in your head says it makes sense. That's the illusion of the unified mind. You think your thoughts and feelings are aligned, but often they're in quiet rebellion. Your right brain knows what matters. It knows when something resonates. It knows when a space is sacred or a relationship is draining, and your left brain will try to explain it away. But you don't need a reason to trust your inner knowing. You just need the courage to stop arguing with yourself, to allow both voices a seat at the table, to stop seeing your intuition as a threat to logic and start seeing it as logic's greatest ally. Because when you let both hemispheres work together, something unlocks, creativity expands, clarity sharpens, compassion deepens. You become both visionary and grounded, both structured and surrendered, not split, but whole, not torn between two minds, but living in the harmony of both. How much of the world around you do you think you're actually seeing? Not theoretically, not what your eyes are capable of taking in, but right now, in this moment, how much are you consciously aware of? You might think it's most of it, the room you're in, the colors, the sounds, the sensations in your body, but the truth is, your attention is a spotlight, and everything outside that narrow beam might as well not exist. Not because it isn't there, but because you're not looking. This is the attention scam, the illusion that you're perceiving reality, when in fact you're perceiving your focus. Your brain is filtering millions of bits of sensory information every second. It has to, otherwise you'd be overwhelmed. So it chooses, it selects, it prioritizes, and what it chooses to show you depends on what you've trained it to notice. That's why two people can stand in the same room at the same time and see completely different things. One notices the tension in someone's voice, the other doesn't even hear it. One sees a subtle movement, the other misses it entirely. It's not that one has better eyes, it's that their attention is tuned differently. And most of the time, you don't realize what you're not seeing until someone points it out. Like the famous experiment where participants watch a video of people passing a basketball and are told to count how many times the ball is passed. Midway through the clip, a person in a gorilla suit walks through the scene, stops, and beats their chest. And nearly half the viewers don't see it. They're too focused on counting the passes. Their attention was hijacked by the task, and the rest of reality disappeared. This is called inattentional blindness. You don't see what you're not looking for, even when it's right in front of you. It sounds absurd until you start looking at your own life. Think of all the times you've lost your keys and couldn't find them, only to realize they were sitting on the counter the whole time. Or when you've walked past someone you know, because you weren't expecting to see them. Or when you've reread the same sentence over and over and still couldn't absorb it because your attention was elsewhere. Your eyes were open, but your mind was closed. Because attention isn't passive, it's intentional. And if you're not directing it consciously, something or someone else will. That's the trap of modern life. Everything is fighting for your attention. Ads, notifications, algorithms, conversations, fears. And every time you shift your focus, your perception shifts with it. You're not just changing what you look at, you're changing the world you live in. Because whatever you focus on becomes your reality. If your attention is constantly drawn to problems, you'll live in a world full of problems. If it's drawn to conflict, you'll see conflict everywhere. If it's focused on beauty, you'll find beauty in the smallest details. But you can't focus on everything. So what are you sacrificing? To pay attention to what you're paying attention to. That's what makes attention the most valuable currency you possess. It determines what enters your awareness, what you remember, what you react to, what you become. And yet, most people never learn how to use it. They treat attention like a reflex, not a skill. They give it to whatever is loudest, fastest, easiest. They scroll, they skim, they multitask. They dilute their own presence in 1,000 directions, never realizing that they're becoming blind, not because of their eyes, but because of their inattention. And then they wonder why they feel disconnected, why life feels blurry, why they can't remember what they did yesterday or what they said in that meeting or why they walked into the room. It's because their attention was never really there. And without attention, there is no awareness. Attention is the doorway through which consciousness enters experience. Without it, you're just reacting, numbly, repeating, consuming, drifting. But when you reclaim your attention, you reclaim your power. You start choosing what to see, what to feel, what to feed, and that changes everything. Because attention doesn't just reveal the world, it creates your experience of it. If you've ever watched the sun set with full presence, you know what I mean. That golden stillness, that aching beauty. It wasn't special because of the sky, it was special because of your attention. You weren't thinking about your phone, or your to-do list, or your past. You were here, fully. And for that moment, you saw clearly. That's what's available to you, not just at sunsets, but in every ordinary moment. A cup of tea, a breath, a conversation, a memory, a silence. When you bring attention to it, it becomes sacred. Because now you're not just living on autopilot. You're witnessing your life as it happens. And in that witnessing, you wake up. You realize how much you've missed, not because it wasn't there, but because you weren't. So you start asking better questions. What have I been blind to because I was too focused on surviving? What beauty have I overlooked because I was scanning for danger? What peace have I missed because I was addicted to distraction? This is how you break the scam. Not by trying to see everything, but by choosing to see deeply. By noticing the breath you usually ignore, the feeling in your body you usually dismiss, the truth in your heart you usually silence. By turning your attention inward, gently, consistently, without judgment, because until you see what's within you, you'll never really see what's around you. Attention is not about focus alone, it's about presence. It's about choosing to be in the room, in the moment, in your body, not scattered, not absent, not always waiting for the next thing, but here, awake. Because this now, is all you ever truly have. And when you give it your full attention, it becomes enough. You think you're seeing the world. You look around and assume what you see is what's there. That the colors, shapes, and spaces are out there, existing exactly as you perceive them. But here's the truth. You've never actually seen the world. You've only ever seen your brain's version of it. Right now, as you look at whatever is in front of you, you're not experiencing the raw external environment. You're experiencing a constructed three-dimensional hologram, an internal simulation built entirely within the darkness of your skull. Light doesn't pour into your mind, it hits your retina, gets flipped, fragmented and transformed into electrical signals. Those signals are sent to your visual cortex, and from there, your brain begins its masterpiece. It paints reality, it builds depth, it adds color, it guesses at edges, it fills in gaps, it interprets, and then it presents the final rendering to you, the observer. But you never see the photons, you never feel the molecules, you never hear the vibrations directly. What you experience is the model your brain builds from the data, a holographic projection stitched together from light, sound, memory, and expectation. And the craziest part, this simulation doesn't happen near your senses, it happens deep inside your brain, in complete darkness, in complete silence. Your eyes don't show you reality, they deliver raw input. Your ears don't play the world, they transmit frequencies. Your tongue doesn't know what chocolate tastes like, it sends chemical messages. All the flavor, the beauty, the color, the sound, all of it is a mental phenomenon, a rendering. The world you think you're touching is happening inside your mind, and yet it feels real. That's how perfect the illusion is. You don't just see color, you see it out there as if it's painted onto objects. But color isn't a property of objects, it's your brain's interpretation of light wavelengths. Grass isn't green. It reflects light at a frequency that your brain interprets as green, But even that interpretation is flexible. Some creatures see infrared, some see ultraviolet, some don't see color at all. So what's real? If a tree reflects light, but no eye sees it, does it still look green? No, because green doesn't exist until a mind makes it. And that's just visual perception. Think about sound. You don't hear sound in the world, you hear it in your brain. Air vibrates. That vibration hits your eardrum transmits that vibration into neural impulses, and those impulses are interpreted as music or traffic or a loved one's voice. But the symphony of sound? It's happening inside your head. Touch? Same thing. You're not really feeling the world. Your skin detects pressure, temperature, vibration, and sends that information to your brain, which creates the sensation of texture, pain, or pleasure. Everything you think you're experiencing out there is being constructed in here. Your body is a sensor, your brain is the renderer, and you, consciousness, are the experiencer of the rendered world. So when you say, I see, what you really mean is, my brain has created a convincing hologram based on limited input. And this rendering isn't neutral. It's shaped by your beliefs, your memories, your expectations. Your brain isn't building reality objectively, it's building it intelligently. It predicts, it filters, it updates, it compares what it receives with what it already knows, and most of the time it edits out anything unfamiliar. That's why you miss things that don't fit your worldview, why you overlook beauty in places you've labeled as ugly, why you find evidence for what you already believe and ignore what challenges it. Your brain isn't trying to show you truth, it's trying to help you survive. So it shows you what feels relevant, what feels safe, what feels expected. That's why trauma can distort the rendering, why grief can dull the world's colors, why depression can make everything feel flat, slow, heavy. The data hasn't changed. The rendering has. Your world becomes a reflection of your internal state. Not because you're imagining it, but because your brain is. And when you realize this, something shifts. You stop trusting your perceptions as gospel. You start seeing them as suggestions, not absolute, not infallible, just a version of truth, built by a brilliant, fallible, adaptable mind. And that opens a door. Because if your brain is constructing your experience, then you're not a prisoner of your perception, you're a participant in it. You can influence the rendering. You can change the filters. You can train your mind to notice what it once ignored. You can expand your awareness beyond the familiar, the safe, the expected. You can teach your brain to see beauty again, to hear silence, to feel presence. And you can remember that just because something feels real doesn't mean it's the only version of real. The person you think you know, your brain's rendering of them. The memory you keep replaying, a mental hologram, not a recording. The fear that grips you before a challenge, a simulation, not a prophecy. Even your sense of self, your identity, your personality, your history is a construct. An internal model built over time, constantly updated, constantly reshaped. But behind that model, behind the rendering, behind the projection, there is you, not the character in the hologram, but the one watching it. The quiet, steady awareness who doesn't change when the image does. The one who remains when thoughts vanish. The one who sees not with eyes, but with presence. You are not the hologram. You are not the rendering. You are the observer. And the more you rest in that knowing, the more freedom you find. Because now you don't have to react to every distortion. You don't have to cling to every illusion. You don't have to be tricked by the simulation your brain creates. You can witness it, appreciate it, even marvel at it. But you don't have to be lost in it, because now you see the trick. And in seeing the trick, you reclaim your power, not to escape the hologram, but to wake up within it, to live lucidly, to move through the dream with intention, to meet each moment with the awareness that what's being shown is only one version of what's possible, and that behind it all, you remain, watching, knowing, free. What happens when the noise stops? When the colors fade, the sounds dissolve, the sensations slip away, and you're left with nothing but yourself? Most people never find out. Your life is filled with sensory input. Constant motion, stimulation, distraction, screens flashing, voices calling, your phone buzzing in your pocket, your environment pulling you in every direction. But underneath it all, there's silence. And that silence isn't empty, it's full. It holds something that's hard to access in the clutter of everyday perception, something ancient, something still, something so deeply part of you that you forget it's there, until all the noise is stripped away. That's what sensory deprivation reveals, not just the absence of input, but the presence of truth. In float tanks, in silent retreats, in deep meditation, when your senses go dark, something begins to stir. It's not what you expected, it's not blankness, it's not boredom, it's you. At first, it's disorienting. Your mind, so used to reacting to the outside world, starts scrambling for stimulation. It creates phantom sensations. Your skin itches. You hear echoes. Your thoughts race. It's like your brain is desperate to fill the void, because it's addicted to input, to noise, to something to respond to. But then, slowly, if you don't fight it, the scrambling stops, the itch quiets, the mind slows, and in the silence a new awareness emerges. You start to notice things that were always there but drowned out. The subtle pulse of your own energy, the gentle rhythm of your breath, the space behind your thoughts. You begin to see how deeply you've been entangled in your senses, not just using them, but mistaking them for reality, for self, for meaning. But when those senses retreat, you realize they were just layers, and underneath them is something more fundamental, something unshakable. You. Not the version of you that responds to external stimuli, not the identity built on sensation and story, but the quiet observer, the one who remains when all input fades, the awareness that doesn't disappear, even when the world seems to. And here's where it gets even stranger. When the senses go silent, sometimes new senses awaken. People in float tanks report visions, insights, emotional waves, not because they're hallucinating, but because their mind, no longer tethered to the outside, begins to explore the inside. The inner space becomes more vivid than the outer. Time becomes elastic, identity begins to blur. You start to feel where your edges dissolve. You begin to see that what you thought was you, your body, your sensations, your reactions, was never the whole picture. In the absence of external anchors, you begin to float in consciousness itself. And that's where the real revelation lies. You were never just the experiencer of the world. You were the space in which the world appeared. Even when there is no sound, no sight, no touch, you still are. Your existence is not dependent on your senses, it's deeper. Sensory deprivation doesn't create that truth, it reveals it. Like fog lifting from a mountain that was always there, like stepping out of a noisy room and realizing you were shouting just to hear yourself think. In silence, truth gets louder. You see how much of your identity was shaped by what you see in the mirror, how much your confidence was tied to how others respond to you, how much your emotions were triggered by what you consume, and in the absence of those triggers, what's left? You, raw, present, undistracted. And it's in that state that clarity begins, not because you figured something out, but because you stopped running from what was always whispering beneath the surface. Your soul doesn't shout, it waits. And when your senses go dark, it finally has room to speak, not in words, in knowing. You might realize you're not as afraid as you thought, or that you've been carrying tension that isn't yours, or that you've never really met yourself without the lens of performance. That's what happens in stillness. You meet yourself for the first time. And it's not always comfortable, because without input, your distractions fall away. You can't scroll. You can't escape. You can't drown discomfort in noise. You have to face it. But that's the gift. You realize you've been running from shadows cast by your own mind. And when you stop running, when you sit with the silence, you see them for what they are. Thoughts, feelings, waves that pass. And beyond them is peace. Not the peace of nothingness, the peace of presence. The peace of knowing you don't need to be stimulated to feel alive. You don't need music or validation or busyness to have worth. You don't need the world to define you. You already exist, complete, within yourself. That's what sensory deprivation teaches you. That truth doesn't come from seeing more, hearing more, knowing more. It comes from less, from subtraction, from stillness, from sitting in the quiet until the noise inside you softens too. And in that softening, something opens. Not just a deeper connection to yourself, but a deeper connection to reality. Because once you've tasted what it's like to be without your senses, you stop trusting them so blindly. You stop assuming that what you see is all there is. You start wondering what else you've been missing, beneath the noise, behind the stimulation. And you start listening again, not with your ears, with your awareness, because that's where the real truth lives, not in the senses, but in what's left when they're gone. You think you know your body. You wake up, stretch, feel the weight of your limbs, the pull of gravity, the texture of sheets on your skin, and you assume that what you're experiencing is your actual physical form. But what if it's not? What if the body you think you have isn't the body you actually inhabit? Because the truth is, you don't directly feel your body, you feel your brain's map of your body. A fluid, shifting representation known as your body schema. It's not a one-to-one blueprint. It's not a static image. It's a constructed simulation, built from sensory input, memory, feedback, and expectation. And just like any map, it can be wrong. It can stretch, it can shrink, it can misrepresent, it can even hold on to limbs that no longer exist. That's why people with amputated limbs can still feel them, scratch them, ache from them, try to move them. Their brain's map still includes that limb. The physical body is gone, but the mental model remains. And because the model is what you actually experience, the limb feels real. This isn't a glitch, it's a revelation. It shows you that what you feel is not your flesh and bone. It's the brain's interpretation of signals, compiled into a usable framework. A holographic model of you that your mind constantly updates like software refreshing in the background. But it doesn't always get it right. Your body schema is heavily reliant on feedback, vision, touch, balance, muscle tension, joint position. Take any of those away, or mess with them, and the map starts to distort. That's why in virtual reality your mind can be tricked into feeling like an avatar's hand is your own. That's why when you sit still in a dark room, your sense of body location begins to blur. That's why under anesthesia your limbs can feel like they're floating, disconnected from time and space. And yet, you believe that what you feel is real, but what you're really feeling is an illusion that's good enough to function. Think about how often your brain has to guess. Right now, you can touch your nose with your eyes closed. Not because you're seeing it, but because your brain knows the general position of your limbs based on internal cues, proprioception. But proprioception isn't precise. It's interpretive. Ever bumped into a door frame you thought you'd cleared? Reached for something and missed? That's not just clumsiness. It's your internal map being slightly off, and the fact that it's usually on is part of the illusion. You don't question the map until it fails you. But when it does, you realize you don't live in your body, you live in a story of your body. That story shapes your identity, your sense of self, your boundaries, your fears. You say, I am here and not there, based on this invisible outline your brain draws, and you've come to accept. But here's the twist. That outline isn't fixed. Your body map expands and contracts based on use, attention, Belief. Studies show that when you use a tool, a stick, a cane, even a tennis racket, your brain temporarily extends your body schema to include it. That's why after playing a video game or riding a bike, the controller or handlebars feel like an extension of you. Your brain has adopted them into its rendering of self. This is why dancers feel the music through the movement of their limbs, why craftsmen lose track of where their hand ends and the brush begins, why a blind person using a cane doesn't feel with the cane, they feel through it. Because the boundary between body and environment is not hardwired, it's imagined. It's a guideline your brain updates constantly to help you survive, adapt, perform. And that means it can be changed. You're not stuck with the body you've always known. You can reshape your experience of embodiment. You can expand your sense of where you begin and end. You can learn to feel into space beyond your skin. You can dissolve the mental borders that define what is you and what is not you. And in doing so, you begin to realize something radical. Your body is not your prison. It's not a rigid structure. It's a dynamic field of perception, fluid, porous, alive. And when you drop the assumption that what you feel is the full truth, you create space to explore what lies beyond it. Because so much of your suffering comes from this body map. You feel tension and assume it's permanent. You feel pain and assume it defines you. You feel separate from others and assume that's reality, but those are all features of the map, and maps can be updated. You can reprogram how you relate to your body. You can bring awareness to parts of yourself that have gone numb, not just physically but emotionally. You can soften the edges where trauma has caused the map to freeze. You can breathe into tightness and watch the borders shift. You can remember that the body you experience is not set in stone, it's drawn in light. And with enough presence, with enough attention, you can change the way you live inside it. You can move from dissociation to embodiment, from numbness to sensitivity, from tension to openness, because your body isn't just a vehicle, it's a message, it's a living reflection of your consciousness, of your thoughts, your past, your habits, your healing. And when you stop seeing it as fixed, you begin to listen to it. You begin to hear the subtle signals, the quiet truths, the whispers of wisdom stored in your cells. You realize that the pain in your shoulder might not just be physical. The clenching in your gut might not be about food. The buzzing in your chest might not be anxiety. It might be the unexpressed energy of a truth you've buried. The body you think you have is only the surface. And when you go deeper, you find layers, not just of sensation, but of memory, of feeling, of story. You find the history of who you've been and the possibility of who you can become. And in that discovery, you stop being at war with your body. You stop needing to control it, fix it, sculpt it. You start relating to it with reverence. Because you realize it's not just a thing you have, it's a sacred field of experience, a canvas your consciousness paints upon, a temple your awareness dwells within, not separate from you, but an ever-changing expression of the self that was never limited by skin. You think you're awake. You feel your feet on the floor, the pressure in your hands, the sounds in your environment. You see the room around you, the objects, the light. It all seems solid, reliable, real. But have you ever had a dream that felt just like this? A dream where everything seemed normal, until it didn't. Until something strange happened, a shift, a glitch, and suddenly you realized none of it was real. You were asleep. That's the shock of lucidity, when the dreamer wakes up inside the dream and sees it for what it is, not by leaving it, but by becoming aware within it. And once you've tasted that realization, something profound begins to stir. The question you can't unask. What if this right now is just another dream? Because here's the unsettling truth. Your waking life and your dreaming life are built from the same raw material. Images, emotions, stories, beliefs. In both states, your brain constructs a reality. It builds a world and places you inside it. It gives you form, it gives you history, it fills your environment with characters and situations, and you respond as if it's all happening to you, because to your mind it is. The only difference is continuity. When you wake up from a dream, it ends. When you wake up in the morning, this world continues. You remember yesterday, you anticipate tomorrow. There's a thread, but that thread isn't proof of reality, it's just a stronger narrative. Because in dreams you don't question. You accept the bizarre as normal. You fly without wings, you speak to the dead, you change locations without walking, and you rarely notice the impossibility of it until something jolts you into awareness. Lucid dreaming happens in that jolt. A streetlight flickers the wrong way, a face morphs, a law of physics breaks, and in that moment of inconsistency, your awareness slips through the cracks. You realize, this is a construct. I'm not in the world, I'm in my mind. But what if waking life is no different? But if you're just as deep inside a narrative, only this one is more consistent, more believable, more socially reinforced. Because when you dream, your brain is active. It's processing memory, emotion, identity. It creates environments as vivid as waking reality. And your sense of self persists. You play a role, you think it's you, but that dream self isn't you. It's a projection, a temporary character your mind generates to navigate the story it's telling. Sound familiar? In waking life, your sense of self is just as constructed. You're not the voice in your head. You're not your history, your roles, your reactions. Those are all characters too. Personas built from memory, expectation, and experience. You say, this is me, but what you mean is, this is who I've been conditioned to think I am, and like in dreams you rarely question it. You go through your day believing in the solidity of your world, the urgency of your to-do list, the identity on your driver's license, the face in the mirror. But what if the only difference between this and a dream is your level of awareness? Because the brain doesn't fundamentally change its process. It still interprets, it still renders, it still fills in blanks. Whether you're dreaming or awake, it's still feeding you a simulation based on perception and expectation. So the question isn't, am I awake? It's, how aware am I? Because lucidity doesn't mean you leave the dream. It means you wake up within it. And that's what's possible here, right now. You can wake up within this so-called waking life. You can become lucid in your day-to-day existence, not by flying or defying gravity, but by noticing. By becoming the observer of the dream instead of the character lost in it. When you do, the world changes. Not because it's no longer real, but because you are more real in it. You stop reacting unconsciously. You stop mistaking the story for the truth. You start to see the symbols behind the situations, the patterns behind the people, the messages hidden in the mundane. Every moment becomes a mirror. Every encounter becomes a teacher. Every emotion becomes a gateway. Because now you're not just playing a role, you're watching yourself play the role. You're aware of your breath, aware of your thoughts, aware of the stillness behind the movement, and that awareness, that lucidity, is the key. It turns ordinary life into a sacred experience. You realize you've been dreaming while awake, dreaming that your worth depends on achievement, dreaming that love must be earned, dreaming that control brings safety, dreaming that separation is real. But now, you're starting to stir, you're beginning to question, and that's the beginning of freedom. Because dreams lose their grip when you see them for what they are. When you recognize that your reality isn't a fixed structure, but a fluid reflection of consciousness, that doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters, because now you're choosing how to relate to it. You can shape your waking dream with intention, with presence, with compassion. You can explore it, transform it, wake others up within it. You're no longer at the mercy of the narrative or the lucid dreamer inside the dream. And from that place you live differently. You ask deeper questions. You listen more closely. You love more fully. Because now you're not sleepwalking through life. You're awake inside it. And yes, the story will continue. The characters will come and go, the settings will change, but your awareness, that remains. It's what follows you from dream to dream, from night to day, from illusion to insight. And the more you rest in that awareness, the more your waking life begins to shimmer. Not because it's fake, but because it's alive. Because you've stopped mistaking the scenery for the self. And you've remembered the truth behind every dream. You are not the character, you are the consciousness. You are not asleep, you are awakening. Now, what will you do with that? What if healing wasn't just about medicine, but about belief? What if your body right now had the ability to repair, to recover, to transform, not just through pills or procedures, but through perception? It sounds like wishful thinking, magical thinking, but it's not. It's the placebo effect, a phenomenon so powerful, so consistent, that it's used as the baseline in nearly every clinical trial. A sugar pill, a saline injection, a fake surgery, given to someone who believes it's real, and then something changes. Pain fades. Symptoms ease. Energy returns. Sometimes even disease disappears. But how? How does something fake create a real physiological response? Because the body listens not just to chemicals, but to consciousness. When you believe you're being healed, your brain starts to behave as if it's true. It releases endorphins. It alters neurochemistry. It shifts your immune system. It activates internal pharmacies you never knew you had. All because of belief. Because belief changes perception. And perception, it turns out, rewrites biology. Your brain doesn't just observe your life, it constructs it. It interprets every signal. It decides what matters. It sets the tone for what's dangerous, what's hopeful, what's painful, what's safe. And those interpretations cascade down through your nervous system, your hormones, your cells. So when you believe a treatment will work, your brain begins preparing the body for that outcome. And the body follows, not because it's being tricked, but because it's being led. This isn't deception, it's direction. The placebo effect isn't about pretending. It's about unlocking the power that's already inside you. Because the same mechanisms that respond to a sugar pill respond to your thoughts every day. Your beliefs are like instructions. They tell your body what reality to prepare for, what to protect against, what to expect. If you believe you're broken, your body adapts to that belief. If you believe you're healing, your body listens. And this goes beyond medicine. It reaches into every corner of your life. Stress isn't just a mental state. It changes your blood pressure, your digestion, your hormones. Joy isn't just a feeling. It boosts your immune function. Gratitude doesn't just feel good. It rewires your brain for resilience. So the line between biology and belief isn't a line at all, it's a dialogue, and you're speaking it every day through your thoughts, your focus, your inner narrative. But here's where it gets deeper. The placebo effect isn't limited to the content of your belief. It's about the experience of belief. It's not just what you think, it's what you feel to be true. That's why rituals matter, why setting expectation, trust, they all amplify the effect. It's why a pill in a white coat's hand works better than the same pill in a stranger's. It's why branding, environment, and even the color of a tablet can change the outcome. Because healing happens in context, and belief is embodied. Your body doesn't wait for proof, it responds to conviction. Which means you don't need to lie to yourself to harness this power, you just need to shift your relationship with possibility. Instead of saying, I hope I get better, you begin to say, I'm becoming someone who heals. Instead of saying, let's see if this works, you say, I'm creating a space for my body to respond. You remove doubt not by force, but by alignment. You align your thoughts, your feelings, your environment, your actions. And from that alignment, your biology receives a new instruction, trust. And trust changes everything. It allows your nervous system to relax, your muscles to soften, your immune system to switch from defense to repair. your energy to return to flow. You're not forcing healing, you're allowing it. But that's not what you were taught. You were taught that healing comes from outside, that someone else knows better, that your body is a machine and only experts can fix it. And yes, medicine has its place, but the most sophisticated technology in any room is still your own consciousness. Because the placebo effect shows us that belief isn't a side effect, it's the main effect. And if your mind can create healing through imagination, what else might it be capable of? What if your body isn't waiting for permission from a prescription, but from you, from your willingness to believe, not blindly but openly, not as a denial of science, but as a deeper layer of it? Because belief doesn't override biology, it communicates with it. It says, we are safe now, we are supported now, we are loved now, and the body responds in kind. This is the power of intention, not just wishful thinking, but embodied focus. Attention infused with emotion, thought aligned with trust. That's what turns an idea into chemistry. That's what transforms suggestion into sensation. So now the question becomes, what story are you telling yourselves? Are you reinforcing your limitations or your potential? Are you reminding your body of trauma or inviting it into peace? Are you feeding your wounds or your wisdom? Because every thought is a signal. Every belief is a chemical. Every moment is a chance to rewrite the script, not by denying pain, but by deciding what happens next. You're not the disease. You're not the diagnosis. You're not the fear. You are the one who can believe differently, and that belief is the beginning of change. So speak kindly to your body. Thank it for trying. Remind it that healing isn't just possible, it's natural. It's what it knows how to do if you give it the right conditions. And sometimes, the most powerful condition isn't a cure, it's a choice. To believe, to trust, to return to yourself, not as a passive recipient of treatment, but as an active co-creator of your own restoration. Because healing doesn't just come from the outside in, it comes from the inside out. There is a silence beyond silence, a perception beyond the senses. And once you've tasted it, even for a moment, you realize the world you've been living in is only the surface. Mystics throughout history have spoken of this, of hearing what cannot be heard, of seeing what cannot be seen, of knowing without learning. They weren't speaking metaphorically, they were describing a state of consciousness in which the veil of ordinary perception lifts, and something more reveals itself. But to reach it, they did something radical. They turned inward, in silence, in stillness, in meditation, in trance. They withdrew from the noisy world of the five senses. They stopped chasing stimulation. They let go of thinking. And in that retreat, something ancient awakened. A sixth sense? A higher awareness? Maybe, but not in the way you've been taught to imagine. This isn't about predicting lottery numbers or reading minds. It's about seeing the structure of reality, the energetic, emotional, symbolic world that lives beneath form. A world you already touch every day, but often ignore. Think of the times you've walked into a room and instantly felt tension. No words spoken, no cues seen, but you knew. Or the moments when someone smiled at you, but their energy told a different story, and you trusted the feeling. That wasn't logic. That wasn't sight. That was your deeper perception tuning in. You've had glimpses, everyone has. But mystics live there. They refine that sense. They train it. They expand it. They trust it. Because they know something most have forgotten. Your ordinary senses are filters. They help you survive. But they don't show you the whole truth. They show you what you've been conditioned to notice. And so the mystic unconditions. They sit, they breathe, they dissolve, and in that dissolution, space opens, not just in the mind, but in awareness itself. And suddenly, the walls between self and other, between form and formlessness, begin to dissolve. You start to feel the field, not as a concept, as a lived experience. The energy of a tree, the emotion behind a voice, the vibration of your own thoughts before they form. You don't just look at life, you merge with it. And in that merging, clarity comes, not because you figured something out, but because you became what you were trying to see. This is what the mystics call gnosis, direct knowing, not through analysis but through communion. You don't learn the truth, you remember it. And what you remember changes you. You realize that the world isn't made of things, it's made of patterns, frequencies, consciousness. That everything you see is a symbol, a mirror, a message, and that you too are part of the message. You're not separate from what you perceive. You are perceiving from within the whole. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You realize that the mystics weren't imagining another world. They were piercing through this one. They were removing distortion. They were dropping assumptions. They were seeing with the eyes of the soul. And yes, it can look strange from the outside. Eyes closed, bodies still, hours in silence. But inside, there's movement, expansion, revelation. They're not escaping reality. They're stepping into a deeper version of it. And you can too. You don't have to become a monk. You don't have to live in a cave. You just have to notice when you meditate, not just to calm your thoughts, but to observe what lies beyond them. When you sit in nature, not just to enjoy the view, but to feel the pulse of life underneath the stillness. When you close your eyes, not to disconnect, but to see without sight. In those moments, your subtle senses wake up. You begin to feel when someone is out of alignment, not based on their words, but their energy. You begin to sense timing, not from logic, but from inner resonance. You begin to perceive purpose not as a plan, but as a pull. And all of this isn't supernatural. It's supernatural only by modern standards, which have forgotten that consciousness is the root of perception, not the byproduct of it. Your culture rewards what can be measured. It worships what can be proven. But the most important truths, the most powerful realizations, they cannot be proven, only experienced. And the mystic dares to experience, to look beyond appearances, to listen beyond sound, to feel beyond skin. Because they've learned that what's real is not always visible, and what's visible is not always real. They've learned that you can't rely on the eyes alone. You must look through the heart, through presence, through intuition. You must become the thing you're trying to understand. That's how they read energy, how they sense connection, how they know when to act and when to be still. Not because they're special, but because they've stopped clinging to the lie that only what is sensed is true. They've stopped believing the illusion of separation. And that's the real sense of the mystic. It's not a new organ. It's a shift in identification, from the seeker to the seer, from the mind to the knowing. And that shift changes everything, because when you realize that your body is not your boundary, you start to feel what lies beyond it. When you realize that your thoughts are not your truth, you begin to hear the quiet guidance beneath them. When you realize that your senses are not your limits, you begin to sense what's limitless. And from that place, you live differently. You speak with intention, you move with grace, you listen with presence, you connect with depth. Because now, you're not just seeing the world, you're seeing through it. You're seeing the patterns behind the people, the symbols behind the scenes, the consciousness behind the form. And you begin to trust that deeper perception. You begin to follow it, even when it makes no sense, even when it defies logic, because you felt something more real than logic. You felt truth, and once you've touched that, you don't go back to sleep. You don't live at the surface anymore. You live from the center. You live from awareness. You live with the senses of the mystics. You've been taught to think of your brain as a receiver, A sponge, a processor, a passive observer that takes in the world, interprets it, and presents it to you neatly packaged. But that's not the full truth. Your brain isn't just receiving reality, it's projecting it. Every moment of every day, it's casting outward an internal film, filled with your expectations, beliefs, assumptions, fears, and memories. And that film overlays everything you see. You think you're seeing things as they are, but what you're actually seeing is a reflection of your own mind. And once you understand that, everything changes. Because reality isn't raw, it's filtered. It's not objective, it's personal. You're not experiencing the world, you're experiencing your version of the world, your projection. That's why two people can walk through the same street, talk to the same people, live in the same house, and have completely different experiences. One sees opportunities, the other sees threats. One feels love, the other feels judged. It's not the place, it's the projection. Your brain is a projector, and your consciousness is the film you're running through it. The images you've recorded through trauma, culture, family, belief systems, the edits you've made to fit in, to survive, to avoid pain, the stories you've repeated so often they've become background scenery. You project it all, automatically, unconsciously. You walk into a room and assume how people feel about you based on past wounds. You judge someone's expression not based on what they've said, but on what your mind expects it to mean. You predict how things will unfold, based on how they unfolded before. And then, something strange happens. You start creating the very reality you fear. Because perception becomes expectation, and expectation becomes behavior. And behavior reinforces experience. So if you expect people to betray you, you act guarded, and people feel that, and they pull away. And you think, see, I knew I couldn't trust anyone. But it wasn't just observation, it was creation. You projected your inner story and then interpreted the world through it. And this isn't just psychological, it's neurological. Your brain is wired to filter reality based on what you already believe. It deletes what doesn't fit. It highlights what confirms your worldview. It prioritizes what matches your emotional state. It's not lying to you. It's protecting you. But it's also limiting you. Because if you never examine the film you're projecting, you'll never change the life you're living. You'll keep walking through the same rooms, meeting the same people, repeating the same cycles, because your internal movie hasn't changed. And here's the radical truth. The world is more neutral than you think. It's not out to get you, it's not here to prove you right or wrong. It's a mirror, a screen for your projections. And when you see that, you stop blaming. You stop needing to change the outer world. You start looking at the lens. You ask, what am I projecting here? Why do I keep seeing this pattern? What part of me believes this is true? And the deeper you go, the more power you reclaim. Because the world isn't happening to you in a vacuum. It's responding to you, reflecting you, matching you. Not as punishment, as feedback, not as fate, as invitation. You are the projector, you are the film, you are the screen. And when you shift your internal movie, the projection changes. Suddenly you notice beauty where there was only boredom. You sense kindness where you used to expect coldness. You allow softness where you once braced for pain. And the world responds. Because it always was, but now you see it. You're no longer blind to what doesn't match your fear. You're no longer stuck in a story you forgot you were telling. You're awake inside the projection room, and you realize you can choose a new real. Not by forcing thoughts, not by pretending, but by feeling into truth, by healing the wound behind the belief, by softening the fear behind the reaction, by forgiving the moment when the story began. You're not doomed to repeat the projection. You can rewrite it. You can edit the script. You can step into the scene as the author, not the character. And when you do, life shifts. Not because the outside changed, but because the filter did. Because now, you're not just seeing your thoughts. You're seeing through them, and behind them is clarity, peace, presence. That's what the mystics meant when they said, the world is illusion. They didn't mean it isn't real. They meant it's not fixed. It's not separate. It's not out there. It's a dance of consciousness, a fluid display, a dream you're both dreaming and living inside. And once you know that, you stop trying to control everything. You start listening. You ask, what is this showing me? What belief is this mirroring? What energy am I sending out without even realizing it? Because every person, every challenge, every moment is part of the projection, part of the feedback loop that shows you your own mind. And if you're brave enough to see it, you're free enough to change it. You stop reacting, you start responding. You stop clinging to the old film. You start creating a new story. From love, not fear. From presence, not programming. From truth, not trauma. And in that shift, the world begins to look different. Not because it changed, because you did. You stopped projecting your pain along. You just had to remember where it was coming from. Not from the screen, but from within. Imagine seeing a letter and hearing a musical note, tasting a word, feeling the texture of someone's voice as if it had shape and weight. This isn't science fiction, it's synesthesia. A rare but very real phenomenon where the senses don't stay in their assigned lanes, where perception crosses over, where one input, like sound, triggers an experience in another sense, like color or taste or touch. It seems like a glitch, like an odd quirk of the brain. But what if it's not? What if synesthesia isn't a malfunction, but a window into how perception really works? Because the truth is, your senses were never meant to be as separate as you think. Your brain doesn't process sight in one vacuum and sound in another. It blends, it layers, it constructs, and synesthesia makes that blending visible. It reveals what's happening beneath the surface in every mind, even if you don't experience it as vividly. You might not taste the number 7 or see blue when someone says Thursday, but you do associate warmth with certain colors. You feel music as emotion. You picture smells as memories. That's not coincidence. That's the architecture of your perception. Because you don't experience the world in isolated data points, you experience it as meaning. And meaning is made by connection. Feel the overlap most people only imply. A number isn't just a symbol, it's a hue. A sound isn't just vibration, it's movement. A word isn't just spoken, it's flavored. And these connections aren't random. They're consistent, repeatable, personal. One synesthete may always see the letter A as red. Another may taste chocolate every time they hear a trumpet. Their experiences are unique but stable, a kind of personal sensory language. And that's what's so astonishing, because it shows us that perception is not just passive input, it's creative, interpretive, meaning-based. You're not a camera taking in the world. You're an artist, rendering your version of it based on your wiring, your memory, your associations. And most of that rendering happens unconsciously. But synesthesia invites you to question it, to see how deeply your brain blends signals to create what you think of as reality. And when you do, you realize you're already experiencing your own form of synesthesia. You feel vibes from people before they speak. You read between the lines of someone's tone. You sense when something is off, even if nothing is visibly wrong. Where do those experiences come from? They come from the same place synesthesia comes from, the interconnected landscape of the brain, the part of you that makes sense of the world by associating, not just processing. You might not have the clinical condition, but you are blending senses all the time. And once you start paying attention, you'll see it everywhere. That's why certain colors make you feel calm, why certain names feel heavy, why some days feel blue and others sharp. These aren't just metaphors, they're echoes of the truth. Perception is not fixed, it's fluid, subjective, and deeply influenced by how you feel, what you expect, and what you believe. And that opens a door, because if perception is creative, you're not trapped in it. You can reshape your experience. You can question what you've taken for granted. You can notice what sensations you've been ignoring and what illusions you've been feeding. You can turn inward and ask, what am I really sensing here? Is this texture emotional or physical? Is this discomfort mine or borrowed from someone else? Is this color, this sound, this taste objective or part of the story my brain is telling? And the more you ask, the more awake you become, not to the real world, but to the constructed one you've been living in. Because synesthesia shows us what's always been true. The borders between the senses are imaginary. You're not a machine with labeled inputs. You're a field of awareness interpreting vibration in every possible form. And that interpretation isn't limited to sight or sound. It extends to intuition, to energy, to resonance. When someone walks into the room and your stomach tightens, what sense is that? When a song reminds you of childhood, not because of the lyrics, but because of the feeling it creates, what is that? It's synesthesia at the soul level, the blurring of inner and outer, the realization that perception is not about data, it's about meaning. And meaning is never neutral. It's alive, it's personal, it's rooted in everything you've ever experienced, felt, feared, or loved. So, when your brain crosses wires, it's not failing, it's revealing. It's reminding you that the world you experience isn't out there. It's happening within. And that truth isn't limited to synesthetes. It belongs to everyone willing to look deeper, everyone willing to stop seeing the senses as boundaries and start seeing them as bridges. Because when you realize your perception is layered, interpretive, creative, you stop asking, what is this? And you start asking, what am I making this? You reclaim your power as the interpreter of your experience. You loosen your grip on what's normal. You open yourself to wonder. And wonder is the key. Because synesthesia isn't just about color and sound. It's about the possibility that everything is more than it seems. That your body, your mind, your reality are not as separate as you've been taught. They are connected, interwoven, cross-wired in the most sacred way. And when you feel that, when you see the world not as pieces, but as patterns, you step into a deeper truth. You are not a sensor. You are a synesthetic soul, feeling your way through a dream of meaning, one texture, one color, one vibration at a time. You trust your memory. You trust it like a compass, a mirror, a guide. You believe it tells you who you are, what happened, what mattered. You think it's a recording, a vault, a photograph frozen in time. And when you recall a moment from your past, something powerful, something defining, you feel certain that what you're remembering is the truth. But it's not. Your memories lie. Not out of malice, not because your mind is broken, but because memory was never designed to preserve facts. It was built to serve meaning, to help you survive, to give you continuity, to create a story that explains who you are, even if that story isn't accurate. You remember a childhood moment, the warmth of your mother's voice, the sting of a friend's betrayal, the sound of laughter echoing down a hallway. You think that memory is fixed, intact, stored safely in your mind like a video on a hard drive. But it's not. Every time you recall it, you rewrite it. You fill in gaps. You reinforce certain details and erase others. You color it with your current emotions, your beliefs, your state of mind. You don't retrieve a file. You reconstruct a story. And the more you revisit it, the more the reconstruction becomes your new reality. What you remember isn't what happened, it's what you believe happened, what your brain decided should have happened, what fits the narrative of you. This is why eyewitness accounts are unreliable, why siblings remember the same event completely differently, why trauma survivors sometimes recall details that never existed, and why you can swear something happened, only to find out later it didn't. Because memory isn't a library, it's a painting. one that gets touched up over and over, each stroke influenced by the present. And when you realize that, your past becomes less certain, but paradoxically you become more free, because it means your story isn't carved in stone. It's malleable, editable, transformable. You are not the victim of your past, you are the narrator, and the narrator is always choosing what to emphasize, what to leave out, what to assign meaning to. You were told memory was sacred, a direct connection to truth, but memory is biased. It's shaped by emotion, by suggestion, by repetition. You're more likely to remember something that scared you than something that nourished you, because your brain is wired for survival. It remembers pain more vividly than peace. That doesn't mean peace didn't happen, it just means the memory of it didn't get stored with the same urgency. So you walked through life believing you had a childhood full of chaos, a relationship full of hurt, a season full of failure. But maybe it wasn't that simple. Maybe your memory has been highlighting the worst while muting the rest. Maybe the love was there, the safety, the laughter, but your brain didn't flag it as important because it wasn't dangerous, because it didn't threaten the system. So now, years later, you remember a version of the past that's darker than it really was, not because you're broken, because your system was trying to protect you. And protection, while useful, isn't the same as truth, which means you need to question your memories, not to erase them, but to unfreeze them, to unhook them from the meanings you attached when you were scared or small or desperate, to make sense of something that hurt. You need to ask, what else was happening? What might I have missed? What if I wasn't betrayed but misunderstood? What if I wasn't abandoned but couldn't see the love that was offered? What if I wasn't wrong but simply inexperienced? These aren't delusions, they're possibility. And possibility is the antidote to memory's rigidity, because once you allow for new perspectives, the story begins to loosen. And when the story loosens, so does the suffering. You don't erase the pain, you integrate it. You hold it alongside the grace. You see the whole picture, not just the part your fear was pointing at. And in that seeing, you begin to heal. Because memory doesn't just live in the brain. It lives in the body, in your reactions, in your hesitations, in the patterns you can't explain. You touch a door handle and feel panic, not because the handle is dangerous, but because somewhere in your past, a moment associated with that gesture was, and that moment was recorded. Not perfectly, but potently. And now, every time you repeat the action, the echo of that memory ripples through your nervous system. It's not conscious, but it's powerful. This is why triggers feel so real. They're not about the present. They're about a past that your body thinks is still happening. And your memory is the bridge. But again, it's not accurate. It's emotional. And that means it can change. Because when you bring awareness to a pattern, when you see the memory that fuels the reaction, you can begin to reconstruct it consciously. You can meet it with presence. You can add new layers. You can infuse it with compassion. And over time, that old story doesn't disappear, it transforms. The memory remains, but the meaning shifts. And with it, the emotion. This is what healing really is. It's not forgetting. It's remembering differently. From the perspective of who you are now, not who you were then. Because now you have tools. Now you have awareness. Now you have choice. You're not stuck with the version of the past your frightened self created to survive. You can choose a new lens, and when you do, something remarkable happens. The people who hurt you become human. The shame you carried becomes understandable. The chaos you survived becomes evidence of your strength. You start to remember not just the wound, but the resilience. Not just the pain, but the persistence. Not just what went wrong, but what carried you through. And slowly, your entire self-image shifts. Not because the facts changed, but because your perception of them did. You realize you are not your memories. You are the awareness that holds them. You are not trapped in your past. You are the author of your present. And every time you look back with new eyes, you reclaim a piece of power you thought you'd lost. So yes, your memories lie, but within those lies is the doorway to truth. Because the fact that memory is fallible doesn't make it meaningless. It makes it malleable. And that malleability is the key to transformation. You don't have to live inside a story that no longer serves you. You can tell a new one. One that honors what happened, but no longer chains you to it. One that holds the pain, but doesn't center it. One that remembers with love. And in that love, the error becomes a gift, because it led you here, to this moment, to this awareness, to this power, to remember and reimagine. You've always believed your memories are reliable, like snapshots frozen in time. You trust them to tell you who you were, what happened, how you became who you are today. You treat them as facts, proof of the past. But memory isn't a photo. It's a story. A story your mind reconstructs every time you recall it. And every time you tell that story, out loud, in your head, even in the way your body responds, you reshape it. Memory lies not to deceive you maliciously, but to keep you safe, to give you meaning, to help you survive. It wasn't designed for accuracy. It was designed for emotion, for narrative coherence, for sense-making, for continuity. It was wired to help you respond to threat, to judge friend from foe, to form identity swiftly. And that means the moment becomes a reference point, a shortcut, a guess. And warnings, pain, fear, those get cemented. Celebrations and ordinary joys, those blur. Listen to that voice saying, I remember when, but ask, how do I know I remember that exactly? Who else was there? How did I feel and what did I make it mean? What else happened that I neglected because it didn't fit the story? Because your memories are shaped by emotion first, detail second, if at all. Each time you revisit them, you're next adding layers, embellishing, forgetting, interpreting. For instance, you might remember a childhood Christmas as magical and warm, but if you revisit the same event while grieving as an adult, your mind may notice loneliness, absence. You may even create emotional textures you never felt back then, and those retroactive feelings feel genuine, even if they were not originally there. That is memory constructing, not recording. That's why your mum's cooking tastes better in memory than it ever did in your adult senses, and why ex-lovers can feel perfect and safe until the pain starts blurring in. Troubled memories, especially trauma, distort even more. They take hold in parts of your nervous system beyond the facility of conscious memory. The gut wrench, the body's freeze, startle reflexes. When your memory of betrayal is traumatic, it not only colors your thoughts, but rewires your nervous system, even long after events are forgotten. And since memory isn't faithful, what stays may not represent what happened, but represents how your nervous system interpreted it. Trauma imprints in sensory detail, a smell, a touch, a tone. These sensory fragments, detached from reliable context, tie themselves to the body. That's why a scent can bring tears, even if it has nothing directly to do with what wounded you, because your body mapped danger. And the memory is not a story, it's a pattern, seared not in awareness, but in physiology. And each partial remembrance is a guess informed by that pattern. So your memory isn't mainly a recall, it's a reconstruction driven by felt somatic echoes, which makes it doubly unreliable but also profoundly powerful. Because if memory is a reconstruction, then you can reconstruct it consciously. You can edit with intention and awareness. You can pull threads apart. You can ask it gentle questions. Who else was present in that moment? What else was happening around me? Was I flooded by story or sensory detail that reacted more than happened? Am I remembering what was there, or what I believed was there? You may recall that snowy afternoon when you felt hurt by someone you loved, only to remember later how they'd been struggling, how you didn't know their pain. That context doesn't rewrite what happened, but reshapes what it meant to you then. It shifts guilt into compassion, anger into empathy. And that shift is the beginning of healing, of agency. Because you aren't trapped in a record, you're talking to a mental model, a model that served a purpose, maybe to protect you, to mark a boundary, to alert you, and now may be outdated, rigid, even harmful. When memory locks into suffering, it becomes a script you replay, emotionally, behaviorally, as if it's the only truth. But it's only one film on a projector of many. That projector, it's your awareness, the space in which all memories appear, not memory itself, but the silent witness to memory. When you rest as that, you begin to see memories as projections, not realities. This doesn't erase them, but it loosens their grip. One afternoon you pause after a flare of sudden emotion. Your body clenches. A memory rushes in. You stop telling yourself, here it comes again, uncontrollable. Instead you remind, this story is appearing again. The director hasn't changed, but the script is only one version. And then, to give yourself permission to look, you breathe into it. You ask, what am I feeling? Fear? Shame? Am I touching a memory or a resonance of an old wound? You may say softly, I remember. But what if there's more I haven't heard, a detail I missed? You start prodding the memory gently, and it unfolds differently, more compassionately, more fully. You ask, do you mind if I look with more kindness today? See if there was love I missed. Suddenly you see yourself age 6 or 16, holding what you could then. Courage, innocence, confusion. You see their heart. You embrace that pain, and for a moment your memory becomes a meeting, not a wound. You didn't change history, but you changed how it lives in your present. That shift ripples outward. It changes how you hold money, love, fear. It shifts proximities, softens reactions. It dissolves patterns rooted in yesterday's meaning. By stepping into this fluid relation to memory, you access a deeper freedom. You begin to see a memory as mine, yours, ours. Whose story is this? All stories are communal, yet much of what you proclaim as personal experience may be echoes of systemic, familial, cultural, generational narratives. When you grew up in a home where anger erupted regularly, a part of you learned power speaks through a raised voice. You assumed many voices sound like that, and you internalize other people's echoes, particularly if your emotional radar was tuned to what hurt. So what feels like personal memory may also carry ancestral tension, cultural identity, or the birthplace of collective hurt. And once you see this, a family member's rage is no longer just a betrayal. It's a call to liberation. Once you realize that your inner child who stood frozen starts to soften, this is memory as initiation, not permanence. Memory can be the threshold through which you step from victimhood to participation, from frozen identity to awake creation. Because the great truth here is, reconstructing memory is a spiritual art. When you repair your story, you rekindle faith in your inner wisdom. You awaken the capacity to evoke the best of yourself, not from what happened, but from what you now choose. It's not rewriting the past, it's unraveling its hold. And that matters profoundly in daily life. You notice your memory shaping your expectations. You don't trust people easily because you remember betrayal, so betrayal feels inevitable. You don't love easily because you remember loss, so loss feels imminent. But if that memory is fluid, you can sense it differently. You can invite curiosity, you can risk trust within reason. You can write love into your cells again by replaying different endings in your mind first. Your meaning-making center is at the core of memory. Your body remembers a betrayal, even if you don't consciously recall the words, but that story doesn't have to hold the gate of connection forever. You can download different scripts. You walked away, but there was confusion, fear, not malice. You felt safe more often than you thought. You gave yourself courage to speak. Your nervous system responds. It senses safety in these remembered patterns and shifts gradually. Over time, emotional reactivity softens. Your memory loosens its defensive archive, and your present becomes richer. This is how legacy shifts. You begin to respond to your child not with the voice of your parent mind, but with your conscious, aware self. You stop acting from a memory-driven autopilot. You start choosing reflection over reaction. You start healing not in spite of memory, but through it. That is the invitation, because you cannot not have memory. That's clear. But you can engage with it. You can bring awareness. You can ask, what else was there? What's the other story I haven't heard? You can sit with memory until the story softens. You can imagine the love left unsaid, the defense mechanism unused, the truth unlived. You can tenderly reconstruct what the kid singing a lullaby might have offered themselves if someone else didn't. And that shifts everything. Pain doesn't vanish, but it transforms. Not erased, integrated. Meeting it becomes a moment of re-narration, a letting go of ruin, stepping onto possibility. This is memory done right, not as chattel or judge, but as sage. It teaches, guides, warns, but doesn't imprison. You become your own elder. Your story becomes your initiation. Your past becomes a teacher, not a jailer. And that, above everything else, rewrites your identity. You are no longer the one who happened to you. You are the one who learned. You are the one who remembered differently. You are the one who chose the way forward, not from a place defined by wounds, but by wisdom. Because memory lies, but memory liberates too. When you embrace it with awareness, when you reconstruct it with courage, you stop repeating old patterns. You stop passing down broken scripts. You become, at last, free. Not from what happened, but free because of it. You've felt it. That sudden pull in your gut, the unshakable certainty that something is right or wrong. The voice in your chest that whispers, "Trust me." That's your intuition. It doesn't come with proof. It doesn't make a case. It simply knows, or so it feels. And when it speaks, it bypasses logic. It reaches you through sensation, emotion, vibe, and so often, it feels sacred, like a divine whisper, like a deeper intelligence beyond the mind. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Not everything that feels like intuition is. Sometimes what you think is a gut feeling is a wound, a fear disguised as insight, a projection wrapped in certainty, a trauma memory whispering, "Don't go there," not because it's dangerous, but because it feels familiar to pain. Your intuition may be real, but it's not always true. Because your intuition lives in the same nervous system that stores your fears. It speaks through the same body that holds your past. So what you think of as a knowing might just be a reaction. You feel uneasy around someone, not because they're untrustworthy, but because they remind you of someone who was. You get a strong no in your gut, not because the path is wrong, but because it feels unfamiliar, and unfamiliar once meant unsafe. Your gut is not infallible. It's informed. Informed by your experiences, your conditioning, your unresolved pain. And often it's not telling you what's real, it's telling you what's familiar, what matches the shape of what hurt you before. That's the difference between instinct and illusion. Instinct is raw, animal. It's the body's immediate assessment of threat or safety. It's built into your biology to keep you alive. But intuition, the kind you talk about, the kind you use to guide decisions, is more complex. It's built on patterns, emotional templates, subtle cues your mind assembles in milliseconds, which means it can be brilliant or biased. It can sense truth or reinforce trauma. And unless you examine it, unless you pause and ask where that feeling is really coming from, you can't know which. You're told to trust your gut. But which gut? the one trained by love or the one trained by fear, because they both speak in the same voice. And until you've done the work of clearing your internal filters, your so-called intuition might just be your pain dressed in sacred clothing. You might walk away from love because it feels off, but what's really off is your ability to receive it. You might say no to opportunity because something's wrong, but what's really wrong is how small you've learned to think. You might feel unsafe, not because you're in danger, but because safety itself feels foreign, and so you call it intuition, but it's not guidance, it's a ghost. A memory, an echo of a moment when you had no control. And now your system tries to protect you from ever feeling that again. So it scans, it reads, it reacts. It labels anything unfamiliar as unsafe, and that reaction feels so immediate, so embodied, that you mistake it for divine intelligence. But it's not divine. It's defensive. This is why your intuition sharpens only after healing, only after you've made space between reaction and wisdom. Only when you've walked into situations that scared you, and realized the fear was old, not present. Only when you've said yes to what terrified you, and found joy where you expected harm. That's how you refine your inner compass. You don't reject intuition, you test it. You feel the signal, but then you trace it. Where did this feeling come from? Is it rooted in reality or in memory? Does it arise from stillness or from panic, from clarity or confusion? Is it guiding you toward expansion or away from discomfort? These are the questions intuition requires if it's going to grow. Because real intuition doesn't scream, it doesn't panic, it doesn't rush, it speaks quietly. It comes through stillness. It rises not from fear, but from peace. And that's the paradox. True intuition often feels less urgent than you expect. It doesn't flood you, it doesn't race. It lands, like a knowing in the chest. Not heavy, not tight, just present. It doesn't need to convince you, because truth doesn't argue, it simply is. But your system is trained to respond to threat, to believe that intensity equals importance. So when something feels big and loud inside you, you assume it's intuition. But intensity isn't always clarity. Sometimes it's just the echo of an unhealed part of you saying, don't go there again. Even if there is where your growth lives, even if there is love, even if there is freedom. So what do? You don't throw away your feelings. You examine them. You ask your body, is this truth or protection? You ask your heart, is this fear or wisdom? You ask your mind, am I remembering something or imagining it? And then you wait. Because if your intuition is real, it won't disappear when questioned. It will deepen. It will clarify. It will unfold without force. But if it fades, it was probably fear. If it shifts, it was probably story. And that's okay. You don't have to be right all the time. You just have to be willing to look deeper, because that's what real inner knowing requires. It's not about certainty. It's about awareness. The awareness that you are layered, that your signals are many, that your body is wise, but also wounded, and both speak. Both must be heard. So you listen. You honor the feeling, but you don't obey it blindly. You check it against your growth. Slowly you begin to tell the difference. You feel the fear and trace it to a story. You hear the yes and feel it match your soul. You follow the nudge not because it's loud, but because it's true. This is the evolution of intuition. From blind gut feeling to embodied wisdom, from reactive pattern to responsive clarity. And you get there not by silencing your feelings, but by getting curious about them. You realize that just because something feels real doesn't mean it's right. Just because it arises fast doesn't mean it's pure, and just because it helped you once doesn't mean it serves you now. Because the intuition of your past self may no longer match the path of your future self. And sometimes you outgrow the gut that kept you alive. You're not just here to survive, you're here to expand. And that means risking the unknown, moving toward what's unfamiliar, saying yes even when your body says no, because you've realized that your no was wired in fear. That's not recklessness, that's discernment. That's the difference between a warning and a wall. And you feel it. When you listen deeply enough, when you sit long enough, when you breathe through the initial rush of emotion, you'll find something quieter underneath. Not an answer, not a command, but a presence. A stillness that knows. That's your real intuition, not the one that panics, not the one that screams. The one that watches, the one that waits, the one that whispers, only when you're ready to listen. And you are, because you're no longer looking for certainty, you're looking for truth. And truth doesn't always feel like intuition, but it is. What if I told you that everything around you, this moment, this room, the screen in front of your eyes, might not be what it seems? What if the world you know isn't really out there at all, but is being rendered in real time by your perception? It sounds like science fiction, like a plot twist in a movie. But this question, this possibility, has been whispered through the minds of philosophers, physicists, and spiritual seekers for centuries. And now science is catching up. The simulation hypothesis, the idea that reality as you know it might be a construct, a perception-based rendering, a simulation, not necessarily created by machines, but by consciousness itself. It's a question that shakes the foundation of everything you assume is real. And you've felt it before, haven't you? In those surreal moments. Déjà vu, waking dreams, inexplicable synchronicities, when the veil seems thin, when the world doesn't behave quite as expected, when it all feels coded, scripted, too perfect, or too strange. What if that feeling is the truth peeking through? Because here's what we know. Your brain doesn't show you reality, it builds a version of it, a highly edited, deeply biased model constructed from limited data, filtered through your senses, shaped by your beliefs. What you see, hear, touch, and taste is not the world itself, it's your brain's interpretation of it. The photons that bounce off surfaces don't come with color. Your brain assigns that. Air doesn't make sound. Your mind converts vibration into music. Even time is not as fixed as it feels. Einstein showed us that time bends, slows, speeds, that space itself is not a container, but a participant in the flow. And quantum physics shattered the rest. Particles exist in multiple places at once. They change behavior based on whether they're observed. Electrons blink in and out of potential states, until a conscious observer collapses their wave into a specific reality. In other words, your observation helps create what you perceive. This is not metaphor, it's measured. And it raises a question ancient sages were asking long before quantum labs existed. If everything we know depends on observation, what is the observer? Who is it? And where is it located? Because when you close your eyes and pay attention, you realize you don't see the world, you experience it from within. The boundaries between the outer and the inner dissolve. What you call reality is happening inside your awareness, always has been. And that awareness, it never changes. It was there when you were 5, it was there yesterday, it's here now, unmoving, unfiltered. And maybe the simulation isn't made of code and computers. Maybe it's made of perception. Maybe you're not in a simulation in the digital sense, but you are inside a constructed experience. A perceptual simulation generated by your mind, by your consciousness, by something far more mysterious than machinery. And maybe that's the point. Think of a dream. When you're inside it, it feels real. The landscape, the characters, the emotions. You move through it as if it's happening, until you wake up and realize it was all generated from within you. What if waking life isn't so different? What if this too is a dream, a lucid one, a shared one, but still a rendering. Because here's the thing, for all our technological marvels, no one has ever found a base layer of reality. The deeper we go into atoms, into quarks, into strings, we find relationships, not things, vibrations, potentials. No solid ground, no firm, unchanging stuff, just patterns, just probabilities, just code. Some scientists now argue that information, not matter, is the most fundamental building block of the universe, that everything we see is the result of binary choices, processed and reprocessed by consciousness. In other words, reality may be information, decoded like a game, like a simulation, and that changes everything. Because if this is a simulation, if your perception is the interface, then your beliefs matter more than you ever imagined. Your thoughts shape what you see, your emotions color what's rendered, your expectations become blueprints, and that explains so much. It explains why different people experience the same events in radically different ways, why your reality changes when your mindset shifts, why certain coincidences feel like messages, because maybe they are, not planted by a puppet master behind the screen, but by you, by your deeper self, the part of you that designed this simulation not to trick you, but to teach you, to help you wake up. Not from the dream, but within it. That's what mystics have always pointed to, that this world, while beautiful, while powerful, while sacred, is not the final layer. It's a training ground, a holographic classroom, an immersive field in which you learn not through books, but through being. And your soul, your consciousness chose this level, chose this character, chose this moment, not as punishment, but as purpose. Because in this simulation every trigger is a lesson, every obstacle a mirror, every pain a message. And the game only changes when you do, when you stop reacting and start observing, when you shift from player to presence, from ego to essence, from identity to awareness. Because here's the twist, you are not the character in the simulation, you are the one playing it. You are the observer, the creator, the experiencer of the experience. And once you realize that, the fear starts to fade. The panic about control, about failure, about meaninglessness, all of it dissolves. Because in a simulation, there's nothing to lose. Only levels to explore, truths to uncover, love to remember. And suddenly you stop asking, is this real? And start asking, what am I here to learn? Because even if it is a simulation, even if all of this is perception layered on perception, the feelings are real, the growth is real. And you, the one who's waking up inside this dream, are more real than anything you see. So maybe that's the truth behind the simulation. Not that life is fake, but that it's flexible, malleable, a reflection of your inner world projected outward, moment by moment, and the more conscious you become, the more the simulation reflects that clarity. It stops glitching, it stops repeating, it starts revealing. Because it's not here to trap you, it's here to train you, and you're not a prisoner in a coded world. You are consciousness, learning what it means to wake up from within the dream. Reality is not silent, it's not still. Everything around you is vibrating. The chair beneath you, the device in your hand, your bones, your thoughts, even the space between particles. It's all movement, frequency, rhythm. A dance so rapid and so precise that it appears solid, still, unchanging. But it's not. Nothing is static. And yet your senses tell you otherwise. Your eyes show you defined edges, your ears detect only certain tones, your skin feels temperature, not vibration, and your mind, filtered through this narrow band of inputs, concludes, this is reality. But it isn't. It's just one slice of the spectrum. You don't perceive reality as it is. You perceive what your biology allows you to. You're not seeing the full light spectrum. You see just a fraction. Ultraviolet, infrared, gamma waves. All of them exist, but your eyes don't register them. Same with sound. There are frequencies animals can hear that you'll never experience. Dogs, whales, bats. They live in dimensions you can't touch. Even touch itself is a filtered illusion. You never truly contact anything. What you feel is electromagnetic resistance. Your atoms pushing against other atoms. You're sensing force, not form. So what you call reality is a vibration filter, a tuning mechanism. One designed not to show you everything but just enough. Enough to survive, enough to navigate, enough to stay sane. Because if your senses showed you all that's truly happening, every vibration, every frequency, every fluctuation, you wouldn't function. You'd drown in data. That's why the filter exists. To keep you stable, to maintain the illusion of continuity, to simplify a universe of endless energy into a manageable stream of inputs. But the cost of stability is blindness, because what gets filtered out isn't just excess noise, it's possibility, dimensions of perception that go unrecognized, energies you've been trained to ignore, subtle sensations dismissed as imagination. Have you ever felt something shift in a room before anyone spoke? Caught a vibe from someone before they moved? Sensed the weight of a memory in a place you've never been? That's the vibration beneath the filter. That's your deeper self tuning into frequencies the mind was taught to disregard. And it's not mystical, it's mechanical. Your body is a resonator. Your heart has an electromagnetic field that can be measured several feet outside your chest. Your brain produces waves, alpha, beta, gamma, that rise and fall with your state of consciousness. Your cells communicate through frequency. You are not just a receiver, you are a tuner. And the signal you receive depends on the frequency you embody. That's why when you're anxious, you attract more chaos. When you're peaceful, the world feels open. When you're loving, synchronicities appear, not because you're lucky, because you've tuned your field. You've shifted your vibration, and now the simulation, the filtered projection, has to render differently. Not because the outside world changed, but because you did. You changed the filter. That's the secret. The vibration filter isn't fixed. It responds to your inner state, your thoughts, your emotions, your beliefs. They all influence what you can perceive. When you're locked in fear, your filter narrows. It shows you threat, confirms your anxiety, hides anything that doesn't support your narrative. But when you're calm, open, centered, the filter expands. You start noticing beauty again, kindness, magic, truth. Not because those things weren't there before, but because you couldn't see them. Your frequency didn't match. That's the law of resonance. You perceive what you vibrate with. You attract what aligns, and everything else, it gets filtered out. Not just spiritually, biologically. That's why gratitude shifts perception. Why breathwork changes your awareness. Why meditation reveals what was always there, but hidden. Because these practices don't create new reality. They tune your filter. They allow you to receive frequencies your mind had silenced, and in doing so, they change your life. Not by force, by frequency. This is what mystics meant when they said, raise your vibration. They weren't being poetic, they were being precise. They understood what science is now confirming. The universe is vibration, and your experience of it, your reality, depends on what you're attuned to. So when you feel stuck, lost, overwhelmed, it's not that the world has turned dark. It's that your filter has narrowed. It's protecting you, limiting you, trying to stabilize you, but you don't have to stay there. You can shift. You can retune. And the way to do that isn't always to push harder. Sometimes it's to become quieter, to breathe, to let go, to feel the frequency of your body and gently raise it, not with effort, but with awareness. Because the higher your vibration, the more expanded your perception. You start hearing guidance that was always whispering. You start seeing patterns that were always unfolding. You start sensing connections that were always present. And the simulation begins to shift. You begin to remember you are not bound by what your senses show you. You are the one who sees through them. You are not a prisoner of the filter. You are the one adjusting it. And the more conscious you become of that power, the more responsibility you have. Because you're no longer just reacting to life. You're shaping it. With every thought, every breath, every emotion, you're fine-tuning the filter that determines your world. So tune wisely. Tune lovingly. Tune upward. Not to escape reality, but to expand it. Because beyond the filter is everything you've ever sensed was missing, and it's been waiting, not out there, but here, in frequency, in vibration, in you. You believe your senses evolved to show you the truth, that what you see, hear, feel, and taste is an accurate representation of the world around you, that your perception is reliable because it's natural, because it's been shaped by millions of years of evolution. But what if that's the very reason it can't be trusted? Because nature doesn't care about truth, it cares about survival. And that changes everything. Your eyes don't show you what's there, they show you what was useful to see. Your ears don't capture the full range of sound, just the slice that helped your ancestors detect danger or opportunity. Your skin doesn't register reality. It registers only enough to help you avoid harm or move toward warmth. You were not designed to perceive the world accurately. You were designed to function in it, to stay alive long enough to reproduce, to detect threats, not to uncover objective reality. And so your entire sensory system became a set of shortcuts, simplifications, illusions, constructed lenses that paint the world in a way that maximizes your chance of survival, not your access to truth. A predator's camouflage doesn't mean it's invisible. It means your visual system overlooks it to keep you scanning only for what has hurt you before. The sweetness of fruit isn't in the fruit. It's your brain's way of rewarding you for energy-rich food. Even color itself isn't out there. It's your brain's assignment of electromagnetic wavelengths into sensations that help you distinguish ripe from rotten, day from night, danger from safety. You see red, but red doesn't exist in the external world. It exists in your perception, as a survival cue, not as an objective truth. Think about that, because if your senses were built not for truth, but for usefulness, then everything you experience is tailored to keep you alive, not to show you what's real. And the illusions don't stop with sight. They continue in your thinking. Your brain is constantly simplifying, collapsing complexity into categories, turning possibilities into certainties, inventing explanations to make chaos feel manageable. That's not wisdom. It's survival. You believe the person who wronged you did so because they're bad, not because it's the full story, but because that story protects you from vulnerability. You believe your partner's silence means disinterest, not because you've explored their inner world, but because assuming distance allows you to preempt pain. Your mind doesn't seek truth, it seeks stability, because confusion can feel like danger, and ambiguity to the ancient part of you is a threat. So your perception resolves it fast, sometimes wrong, always biased. And that bias? It's not personal, it's evolutionarily. Every creature on Earth filters the world according to its needs. The frog doesn't see still objects. It only detects motion, because that's how it finds food. The bat sees through sound, bouncing sonar off surfaces. The bee sees ultraviolet, helping it find nectar that human eyes miss entirely. So, what is real? It depends on who's perceiving, and what they need to survive. That's the fundamental flaw in trusting your senses. They don't show you the world. They show you your version of it. And that version is filtered by biology, by fear, by utility. So much so that you can walk through the same space as someone else and experience it completely differently. Because you're not experiencing the space, you're experiencing your survival lens. And that lens, while helpful, can become a prison, because it limits what you're willing to see. It edits out possibility. It convinces you that what you've known is all that's real. And so, the unfamiliar becomes unsafe. The unknown becomes unwise. The uncomfortable becomes wrong, even when it's exactly what you need. That's why growth feels threatening, why truth often feels like a betrayal, because it doesn't match the story your perception has created to keep you safe. You recoil not because the new idea is false, but because your nervous system treats difference as danger. But that's not truth reacting. That's your evolutionary machinery. It's kept you alive. But it hasn't made you free. To be free, you have to see the filter. You have to recognize that what feels real might just be what helped you survive before. That your instincts, while important, aren't always accurate. That your judgments, while fast, aren't always wise, because they're rooted in what used to work, not in what's true now. That's the cost of survival-based perception. It fossilizes you, locks you into patterns, builds walls around your awareness. Until one day, the threat is gone, but the fear remains. The danger has passed, but the illusion continues, and you never see the new possibility because it doesn't fit the old program. But you can break the program. You can question the filter. You can start asking, is this true or just useful? Did I decide this, or did evolution decide it for me? And when you ask those questions, your perception begins to loosen. You stop assuming. You start investigating. You realize that what feels like instinct might be conditioning. What feels like knowing might be memory. What feels like reality might be utility. And that humility opens the door to real transformation. Because once you see that perception is a tool, not a truth, you stop worshipping it. You start expanding it. You realize that intuition must be refined, that observation must be questioned, that safety must be recalibrated, not just for comfort but for growth. You stop being a passive receiver of the world and become an active creator within it, not by ignoring what you feel, but by understanding why you feel it, not by abandoning instinct, but by deepening its accuracy, not by rejecting the body, but by evolving its intelligence. Because your biology got you here, but your awareness will take you further, past the limitations of useful illusions, past the confines of inherited fear, into a reality that's not filtered for survival but chosen for truth. And that choice is the beginning of freedom. You think you're the one who sees, the one who hears, who feels, who thinks, the one behind your eyes, the presence looking out at the world from a central point inside your skull. But what if that's just another illusion? What if you're not the observer at all, not the perceiver, not the experiencer, but something deeper, something quieter, something far less personal and infinitely more vast? Because when you close your eyes and ask, who is seeing this, the answer slips away. You think it's you, but who's that? The voice in your head? The identity you carry, the history you remember, those are just thoughts, memories, sensations, content flowing through awareness. But what's aware of them? That's watching those thoughts move. What hears the inner narration? What notices sensation? That is consciousness, not the content. The context, not the observer, but the space in which observation happens. You're not looking through your eyes. You're not sitting behind your thoughts. You are the field in which seeing and thinking and hearing arise, and that field has no edges, no gender, no age, no story. It just is, timeless, boundless, silent, and always present. You don't wake it up. You notice that it's always been awake, even when the body was small, even when the thoughts were different, even when the world around you changed, that you, the deeper you, never changed, because it's not a you at all. It's the backdrop, the canvas, the awareness in which your life plays out like a movie projected on a screen. You are not the actor. You are not the script. You are the screen, the unchanging presence behind every flicker of emotion and sensation. But here's where it gets tricky. The mind doesn't like that. It wants to be the center. It wants to believe it's in charge, that it's thinking, choosing, reacting. So it creates a subtle illusion, an I that owns experience. I see, I think, I feel. But pause. Where is that I? Can you locate it? Not the thoughts about it, not the image, not the voice, the actual perceiver. Where is it? The more you look, the more it disappears. You find only thoughts, sensations, reactions, but no observer. Because there isn't one. There's just consciousness, awareness itself. And it's not yours. It's not personal. It doesn't belong to you. You belong to it, just like the waves belong to the ocean, not the other way around. You are not the individual wave saying, I am aware. You are the ocean noticing itself through the wave, and that changes everything. It means you're not separate, not limited, not defined by your thoughts or your pain or your history, because those are appearances, temporary patterns on the surface of awareness. But you are the depth beneath, and that depth can't be harmed. It can't be broken. It doesn't suffer the way the ego suffers. It simply observes. Not coldly, but lovingly, like the sky holding every weather. And you've felt this, in stillness, in awe, in heartbreak, so total it silenced the mind. There was no narrator, no identity, just presence, just this, just now. That's your true nature, not the thinker, not the feeler, not the doer, but the space in which all doing, feeling, and thinking arise. And once you see that, even for a moment, the illusion of the observer starts to unravel. The urgency fades, the identity softens, because you no longer need to defend a self that doesn't truly exist. You don't need to prove your worth, to argue your perspective, to cling to your pain, because you know the one who's hurt is not all of you. The thoughts you're having are not you, they're content, not consciousness. And suddenly, life gets lighter, not because the content disappears, but because you stop mistaking it for your identity. You become the witness not of life, but of the illusion of the one watching it. And that subtle shift is liberation. It's the end of striving, not because you don't care, but because you no longer believe the voice that says you must control everything. You see that it's just noise in the field, waves on the surface. You let them rise, you let them fall. But you no longer chase them, because you are the ocean, the boundless, ever-present, silent awareness within which all perception happens. You never were the observer. You are what holds the observer, and everything the observer sees. At some point, you stop asking if your senses are lying. You start realizing they always were. And that's not a failure of biology. It's a design, a necessary illusion, a framework that allowed you to live, to respond, to grow. But now, something deeper inside you is stirring. Not just a curiosity, but a knowing that there is more than color and sound and touch, more than stories and thoughts and emotions, more than the rushing world your mind scrambles to decode. You begin to feel that what you see isn't the point, that the real you isn't in what you observe, but in what observes. And so you begin the shift, the sacred shift from experiencing the world through your senses to witnessing the one experiencing. This is not a detachment. It's not apathy. It's not floating above your life like a ghost. It's presence, the deepest, most rooted presence you've ever known. You don't leave your life. You step into it more fully. Because now you're not blinded by the story. You're not swept up in the trance of reaction. You're watching, not passively, but reverently, like someone standing at the edge of a vast ocean, knowing they are both the wave and the one watching the tide roll in. That's what it means to become the witness, to sit quietly behind the show, not to deny it, but to see it clearly, to experience thought without being consumed by it, to feel emotion without collapsing into it, to notice the world without being lost in the need to fix or chase or escape. You sit at the still point inside you, and you look, and you see. It begins simply with breath, noticing it, not controlling it, feeling its rhythm, not as something you do, but as something happening within you. Then you watch a thought appear, just one. You don't chase it, you don't judge it. You watch, like a leaf drifting down a stream, and then another comes. You see it, and let it pass. Then a sensation arises, a pressure in the chest, a hum in the jaw, a tug behind the eyes. You don't name it, you feel it. But not as something happening to you, as something happening within you. And somewhere in that noticing, a gap opens, a stillness, a space. The more you rest there, the wider it becomes, and soon you're not looking from the mind, you're looking from the soul, from the awareness that existed before this body, before these eyes, before this life. You are not in time anymore. You are in being, unshaken, untouched. That's where the illusions begin to dissolve. The illusion of control, the illusion of separateness, the illusion that your value comes from what you do, or how you're seen, or what you accomplish. From here, none of that holds weight, because here, in this witness state, you remember, you were never what happened to you. You were never the labels you wore. You were never your past, your future, your mistakes, or even your triumphs. You were the one who watched it all. Without opinion, without fear, without needing anything to be different. And from that place something sacred begins to unfold. You start to see others, not as roles or reactions, but as light, wrapped in their own illusions. You start to listen, not to answer, but to truly hear. You start to respond, not from defense, but from stillness. This is what the mystics meant when they spoke of transcendence. Not escape, but clarity. To rise above doesn't mean to leave. It means to see clearly while remaining fully here. To walk through the world with open eyes and an open heart, but rooted in the truth that none of it defines you. That everything is passing, that all appearances, all sensations, all dramas are waves in the ocean of presence, and that you are not just in the ocean, you are the ocean. When you become the witness, you don't stop feeling. You feel more, because you're no longer protecting yourself from sensation. You feel pain without becoming it. You feel joy without clinging to it. You hold space for it all. That's power. That's peace, that's freedom, and it doesn't require robes or retreats or renunciation. It begins now, wherever you are, by noticing, by pausing, by turning the gaze inward, not to fix but to observe, not to analyze but to remember. You don't become the witness, you uncover the witness that's always been there, waiting, watching, patiently, silently, ready to reveal the one truth your senses can't touch, that what you are is not what you perceive. It is what perceives it all. Every day, your mind tells you a story, a stream of thoughts, judgments, interpretations, memories, and predictions, moving so fast you forget you're listening to it. You believe it's showing you the world, but really it's showing you a version of it. Version shaped by habit, by fear, by urgency and repetition, and over time that story becomes your reality. You stop seeing what's actually there. You see only what your mind expects to see. You don't hear the moment, you hear the echo of what happened yesterday. You don't feel the now, you feel the residue of what might happen tomorrow. And slowly, quietly, you lose touch with the one place where truth always lives, the present. This is why mindfulness is not a luxury. It's not a lifestyle trend. It's not about becoming calm for a few minutes a day. It's a return to sanity, a reset button for a system that's been hijacked by distraction, fear, and noise. Mindfulness is the art of seeing what's actually here, not what you fear, not what you assume, not what your past has trained you to notice, but what is. This breath, this sensation, this moment. And when you step into that space, when you let go of the mental movie and simply observe, you begin to remember what you forgot. Reality was never lost. It was simply buried under your thoughts. Buried under speed, under noise, under the constant grasping for control. Mindfulness invites you to stop, not because life isn't urgent, but because it's too important to rush through unconscious. It invites you to see, to look again, to gently remove the filters and open your awareness to what's really here. Not the story of it, not the opinion of it, the truth of it. A cup is not a cup, it's light, shape, reflection, weight, temperature. A face is not a face, it's presence, history, emotion, soul. Even breath is not just air, it's movement, it's life, it's a tether to now. Mindfulness brings you back, not just to your senses, but through them. Because when you pay attention, deeply and without grasping, you begin to notice that your senses aren't fixed inputs. They're alive, dynamic, and they only reveal their full truth when you're fully present. Otherwise, you're reacting to approximations, to simulations, to echoes of old information your mind recycles. But mindfulness pauses that loop. It creates space. And in that space, clarity returns. You begin to see how much you were missing, not because it wasn't there, but because you weren't. You begin to hear how much of your inner voice wasn't yours at all, but echoes of conditioning. You begin to feel, not just emotion, but energy, movement, subtle patterns beneath the noise. This is why mindfulness heals. Because it restores contact with the body, with sensation, with now. And now is where your power lives. Because now doesn't carry the weight of the past. Now doesn't fear the future. Now just is. And the more time you spend in it, the more you realize it's enough. You are enough. Right here, right now, this is the reset. Not just from stress, not just from overwhelm, but from illusion, from the false idea that you are separate, broken, behind, or not doing enough. Mindfulness reveals that there is no behind. There's only here. There's only this breath, this moment, this aliveness. Everything else is imagination. And that doesn't mean the past doesn't matter, or the future isn't real. It means neither one is happening now. And until you return to the now, you're not really in your life. You're thinking about it, predicting it, regretting it, but not living it. Mindfulness changes that. It calls you home. It says, look again. Not with effort, but with presence. Not with judgment, but with kindness. It doesn't require silence. It doesn't require stillness, only awareness. You can wash a dish mindfully. Feel the water, the weight, the movement. You can walk mindfully. Feel the rhythm of your feet, the breeze on your face. You can speak mindfully. Hear the words before you say them. Feel the intention behind them. It's not about doing less. It's about being more fully in what you're doing. And when you are, something sacred unfolds. Time slows. Stress softens. Reactivity fades. And clarity rises, not the kind that shouts answers, but the kind that makes space for them to come. Because when the noise quiets, wisdom speaks. Not from the mind, from something deeper. From awareness itself. You begin to live from center, not from panic. You begin to respond, not react. You begin to see, not just what's in front of you, but what's within you. And what you see is enough. Always has been. Mindfulness doesn't make you better. It reveals that you never needed fixing. You only needed to come back to return to the sacred now, where truth lives, where peace breathes, where the illusion ends and reality begins. There is a way of seeing the world that doesn't rely on thought, a way of knowing that doesn't come from reasoning, analyzing, comparing or labeling. It's older than language, quieter than the mind, and more honest than any belief you've ever held. It's called direct experience, and the gateway to it is meditation. But not the kind of meditation you've been sold. Not the performance of stillness, not the battle against thoughts, not the pursuit of peace. True meditation isn't something you do. It's something you stop doing. You stop narrating. You stop filtering. You stop trying to make the moment different than it is. And in that stopping, something extraordinary begins. You begin to perceive, not through the lens of memory, not through the veil of expectation, not through the identity you carry. You perceive the world as it is, raw, undivided, alive. This is meditative perception, not a technique, but a state, a way of being, so present that your senses open fully, and yet you no longer experience the world through your senses, but within a deeper awareness that holds them all. The usual distortion is gone. The color isn't just color. It's pure light, moving in form. The sound isn't just noise. It's vibration meeting your field. The body isn't just skin and tension. It's space and sensation, arising and dissolving like clouds in an endless sky. And your mind? It becomes transparent. Thoughts still move, but they don't stick. They pass like wind through a tree. No resistance. No grasping, no effort, just experience, just now. In this state, the illusion of separation softens. You stop dividing the world into me and it. You stop naming what you see. You stop asking what it means. Because meaning is mental, but truth is felt. And in meditative perception, truth reveals itself, not as an idea, but as a presence. You realize that you were never separate from what you're perceiving. There was no observer over here and object over there. There was only this, one movement, one awareness. And for a moment, the veil drops, and you know, not intellectually, viscerally, you know that what you've been calling reality was always filtered, always shaped by the restless hunger of the mind, always edited by the story you carried. But now you're in the world before the story. You see the face before the name. You hear the sound before the label. You feel the breath before the thought says, "This is breathing." And it's so quiet, not silent, alive, but quiet in the way a mountain is quiet, powerful, still, undeniable. In that quiet, perception isn't dulled, it's heightened. You hear more, you see more, not because the world changed, but because your interference stopped. Your commentary paused. Your grasp on control loosened, and suddenly what you called ordinary becomes sacred. A leaf becomes a miracle of geometry and growth. A shadow becomes an invitation to stillness. A stranger's eye holds galaxies. That's what meditative perception does. It doesn't add something new. It removes what was never needed. It clears the glass, and when the glass is clear, light shines through. But here's the mystery. You can't make this happen. You can only make space for it. You can only sit, breathe, be, and let go. Let go of trying to fix. Let go of trying to get somewhere. Let go of the belief that awakening is somewhere else. It's not. It's here, in this breath, in this moment, in this body, exactly as it is. That's the paradox of meditative perception. You don't reach a new state. You return to your natural one. Before you learn to separate, before you learn to judge, before you learn to see the world through the cracked lens of thought. And in that return, you remember, you were always whole. You were always home. The distortion was never in the world. It was in the overlay, the interpretation, the relentless mental noise that told you life had to be understood to be lived. But it doesn't. It has to be felt. Directly, intimately, as it flows through you, not to be controlled, but to be honored. And in that honoring, everything simplifies, everything softens, and what's left is the most sacred truth you'll ever know. Reality is not something you look at, it's something you are. You've spent your life looking outward, looking for answers, signs, confirmations, evidence. Through the five senses you were taught to trust. You looked for beauty with your eyes, listened for truth with your ears, tried to feel peace with your skin, smell, safety, taste, fulfillment. And at some point, maybe without even knowing it, you began to believe that what you needed was out there, that if you could just see more, hear more, understand more, you'd find it, find yourself. But you didn't. Not really. Because no matter how far you searched, something was always missing. You saw the world, but not yourself. You heard the noise, but not the silence behind it. You touched life, but it didn't touch you back. Until one day, maybe today, you felt it. The call to turn around. Not away from the world, but back toward the one who's been watching it this whole time. That's what reclaiming your inner sight is. It's the moment you remember you are not what you've been perceiving. You are the one doing the perceiving. Not the body, not the eyes, not the thoughts spinning inside your skull. You are the awareness that holds them all. And that awareness, it doesn't blink, it doesn't age, it doesn't vanish when your eyes close or your mind quiets. It remains, silently witnessing, silently being. You've known this. You've felt this. In moments of stillness when everything stops, but you're still there. In grief so deep the thoughts collapse and something wordless rises to meet the moment. In awe, when your heart swells and you can't explain why. That's not your senses talking, that's not memory or logic, that's the real you, the seer. And once you feel that, really feel it, not just as a theory but as truth, everything changes. Because you realize the world hasn't been hiding anything from you, you've been looking through the wrong lens. You've been trying to see with your eyes what can only be seen with your soul, trying to understand reality by studying its shadows instead of turning toward the light that casts them. And now, you're ready to turn, to reclaim the sight you forgot you had, to return to the one place you never truly left. The center, the still point, the witness, you. Not the name, not the body, not the personality, but the presence. Reclaiming your inner sight isn't about escaping life. It's not about becoming passive or disinterested or detached. It's about becoming fully here, so present, so open that you stop confusing the appearance of things with their essence. You stop mistaking the seen for the seer. You stop living through borrowed eyes and start living through truth. Because inner sight doesn't come from sight. It comes from stillness. It's born not in your pupils, but in your awareness. It has nothing to do with vision and everything to do with clarity. And that clarity has been with you all along, buried beneath the noise, beneath the grasping and judging and categorizing. You don't need to gain it. You need to remember it. And to remember it, you must stop looking for yourself in reflections, because you'll never find yourself in a mirror or in someone else's eyes, or in a resume, a title, a label, a story. All of that is content. You are the context. All of that is image. You are the source. You are not what you see. You are the one who sees. You are not the thought. You are what notices the thought arise. You are not even the sensation. You are the open space in which sensation appears. That's why reclaiming your inner sight feels like coming home, not because you went somewhere, but because you stopped trying. You stopped chasing. You stopped searching with the very tools that were keeping you blind, and you listened, not with your ears, but with your soul. You noticed. You returned. And from that place deep within yourself, You see the world differently. You see pain, but don't become it, because now you see through it. You see from center, from stillness, from awareness itself. And that awareness, it's not limited by your senses. It's not bound by your beliefs. It's not affected by your emotions or opinions or doubts. It's the vastness behind it all, the field in which the world plays out like a dream, and yet it's more real than anything you've ever touched, because it doesn't change, it doesn't leave, it doesn't fade. It simply is, and the more you rest in it, the more the illusion fades, the illusion that you are your body, the illusion that you are your thoughts, the illusion that you are what happens to you. You aren't, you are what holds all of that. The seer, the witness, the silent space that allows every experience to unfold. And when you truly know that, not just in theory but in your bones, your breath, your being, something sacred awakens. Not some mystical gift, not superpowers, but your natural clarity, your grounded presence, your original sight. And with that sight, you see people differently. You stop looking at their roles, their behavior, their masks. You see the light in them, the awareness behind their eyes. You recognize yourself in them. And life stops being a battlefield. It becomes a mirror, a teacher, an unfolding mystery. Because now, you're not seeing for answers. You're seeing from awareness. You're not scanning life to find something to fix or improve. You're letting life reveal what's already whole. And even when pain comes, and it still will, you meet it differently. You feel it fully. But you don't lose yourself in it, because you know you are not the pain. You are the one who sees it. And that changes how you heal. You stop needing to escape. You start allowing everything to rise and fall in the field of your presence. Because you trust it now. You trust yourself. Not the story, not the persona, the awareness. You've reclaimed your sight, and now you walk differently. You don't rush. You don't force. You don't grasp. You move from knowing, from alignment, from deep inner stability that no circumstance can shake. Because you know who you are, not as a concept, as a felt truth, a living presence. That truth isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It whispers. In the pause between thoughts, in the space between breaths, in the stillness of simply being. And now you listen. You see, not with your senses, not with your intellect, but with your soul, because you've remembered. You are not the seen, you are the seer. You were never trapped. You only believed you were. You believed it because the world looked solid, because the stories in your mind sounded real, because your emotions were loud and your senses so convincing. You believed it because everything around you echoed the same lie, that what you see is what is, that what you feel defines you, that what happens outside you determines what lives inside you. But the trap wasn't real. It was a mirror maze, a trick of the light, an echo chamber built from unquestioned thoughts, looping stories, and a culture that teaches you to trust everything except yourself. The walls that closed in weren't made of matter, they were made of meaning, of conclusions drawn too early, of identities assumed without awareness, of beliefs inherited without question. You weren't trapped in your life, you were trapped in your lens, in your perception, in the idea that there was something to be fixed out there before you could feel whole in here. But now, you see that the only prison was the one built by thought, by the mistaken belief that the world happens to you, by the illusion that your senses deliver the truth. They don't. They deliver a version, a translation, a rendering tailored to your nervous system, your past, your expectations, and your fears. What you thought was reality was just your programming, reflected back at you. But that's not a failure. That's not a problem. That's a gift. Because what can be constructed can be deconstructed. What was formed in the mind can dissolve in awareness. And when the illusions fall away, what's left isn't emptiness. It's freedom. It's the open sky behind the clouds. It's the silence beneath the noise. It's the truth that never left. You were never trapped. You were dreaming. And now you're waking up. Waking up to the simple, radical truth that everything you've been looking for already exists within you. Not as a metaphor, not as a feel-good idea, as a living, breathing presence, the one that has always been watching, the one that's never changed no matter how many lifetimes or masks you've worn. That awareness is you, not the you others see, not the name or the face or the role you play, but the vast, boundless being that sees all of it and remains untouched. And that's what they never taught you, that the truth you seek can't be found through the senses, because it's the source of the senses. You can't see it, but you can see from it. You can't hear it, but you can hear with it. You can't touch it, but you can live through it, because it's not a thing, it's not an object. It's the ground of being itself. And once you realize that, once you truly know it, not just in your head but in your bones, then even the illusion serves you. Even the false becomes part of the unfolding. You don't need to resist the senses. You don't need to silence the mind forever. You simply stop believing the lie that that's all there is. You see the mind for what it is, a tool. You see the body for what it is, a vehicle. You see the senses for what they are, windows, not the house. And you begin to live differently, not floating above life, rooted within it but no longer consumed by it. You laugh more, not because everything is funny, but because you're no longer fooled. You love more, not because it's safe, but because you're no longer seeking permission. You forgive more, not because it didn't hurt, but because you're no longer holding yourself hostage. You let go, not to escape, but because you remember. You remember that peace is not found in controlling the world. It's found in surrendering the illusion that you ever needed to. You remember that clarity doesn't come from analyzing everything. It comes from being with it, fully, honestly, open. You remember that truth is not something you discover outside. It's something you become when you remove the distortions. That's the essence of living beyond the senses. Not denying the world, but no longer being ruled by the surface of it. You still see color, but now you notice the light behind it. You still hear sound, but now you feel the silence holding it. You still move through form, but now you feel the formless moving through you, and life becomes sacred again. Not because it changed, because you did, because you stopped trying to extract truth from illusion, and you started embodying truth as your natural state. That truth isn't complicated. It doesn't need words. It doesn't shout. It hums quietly in your center. It breathes you. It is you. And you don't need to reach it. You need to relax into it right now, exactly as you are. Because the only thing between you and truth is the belief that there is a distance. There isn't. There never was. You were never outside of it. You were never separate. You were never less than whole. You were simply looking through the lens of survival, fear, and programming. But now you've looked through that lens, and you've seen it for what it is. A filter, not a fact. A pattern, not a prison. And the moment you saw it, it lost its grip. Because awareness makes illusion transparent. And what's transparent can no longer trap you. Now you see. Now you know. Not because someone told you. Not because you read it in a book or heard it in a teaching. But because you remembered. And in that remembering you became free. Free to choose perception. Free to move from presence. Free to stop pretending you are smaller than you are. And the irony? You don't even have to do anything with this freedom. You just be it. You walk in the world differently. You look with softer eyes. You speak with cleaner energy. You move with a heart that isn't trying to be right, only real. Because you are no longer seeking confirmation. You're resting in revelation. The revelation that you are not just a self having experiences. You are awareness, watching experience unfold. And that awareness? It's not local. It's not limited. It's not born and it doesn't die. It expands, it connects, it includes everything. So even when the senses come alive again, even when the illusion feels thick, you smile, you breathe, you return to center, to clarity, to now. Because now, you know, you were never trapped. You were never broken. You were never far from truth. You were simply believing the movie. But now the lights are on, and you're still here, still aware, still home, always.